Hey everyone, welcome to Night Stories Craft. Tonight's stories are gentle, calming, and perfect to fall asleep to. Whether you're relaxing with some Minecraft in the background or just looking to drift off peacefully, I'm really glad you're here. Our very first story is about a person who kept reserving the same quiet study room at the library, yet never actually used it until the day our paths crossed. So find a comfortable spot, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I always thought of the campus library as a kind of neutral zone. It wasn't exactly cozy, and it definitely wasn't glamorous. The fluorescent lights hummed just enough to remind you they were there. The carpet had that weird pattern that looked like it was designed specifically to hide stains, and the chairs squeaked if you shifted your weight more than once every 10 minutes. But it was a place where nothing was really expected of you except to be quiet and try, in some way, to be a little bit better than you were when you walked in. Read a page, finish a chapter, answer an email, edit a draft, or, sometimes, just sit at a desk and pretend to work while your brain slowly rebooted. By the time all this started, I'd already spent more hours than I could count in that building. I was in grad school, working on a thesis that was slowly turning my brain into lukewarm oatmeal, and I had a part-time job at the library's front desk to help pay rent. Between those two things, I joked that they should start charging me property tax. The library had 3 floors. The first was loudish, group tables, printers that jammed if you looked at them wrong, students walking in with coffee cups and backpacks half-zipped. The second floor was quiet, but not sacredly quiet. The kind of place where you could whisper to your friend or cough without 50 heads turning in Yohinen. The third floor was where the study rooms were. They weren't fancy, just small glass-walled cubes with a table, 4 chairs, and a whiteboard that always had a faint ghost of someone's equations or outlines still clinging to it. You could reserve a room in 2-hour blocks through an online system or in person at the desk. Officially, they were for group work, but everyone knew people used them just to not be stared at while they stared at their laptops. Part of my job was managing those reservations. When I sat at the 3rd floor help desk, I had a little screen that showed me a grid of the rooms. Room 301 to 312. Time slots. Names. You'd think it would be boring, and most of the time, it was. And then I started noticing room 308. The first time I saw the name, I didn't think anything of it. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of day where the sky was basically one big cloud and everyone's mood reflected the weather. I checked the system, and there it was. 308. 12 o'clock. Reserved. R. Vance. Nothing unusual. People reserved study rooms all day, every day. But when 10 o'clock rolled around, and the time slot turned yellow on my screen to show it was in use, room 308 stayed empty. At first, I assumed they were late. It was midterm season. People were dragging, but 11 rolled around. The 12. The little block slid away to the left, into the past, and 308 stayed vacant, glass walls reflecting the bland fluorescent light like always. No big deal, I thought. Someone forgot. It happens. The next day, I checked the schedule again out of habit. 308, 10 Omai, 12 Unquak. Reserved. R. Vance, again. I watched the time tick by. Students came and went from the other rooms, arms full of books and laptops, occasionally knocking on the desk to ask for dry erase markers. 301, 308, 309. They all filled up and emptied like usual. Room 308 stayed empty the entire time. That's when it started to ping my curiosity. I'm not proud of this, but when you sit at a desk for 4-hour shifts watching people enter and leave the same hallway, you start to latch onto whatever small patterns you can. A guy who always wears the same green hoodie on Thursdays. A girl who reads romance novels behind a structural engineering textbook. 2 friends who pretend to study, but actually just scroll on their phones in synchronized silence. And now, room 308, and whoever R. Vance was, On the third day, I saw the name again. Same time slot, same room. 308, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Reserved. R. Vance. I watched more closely this time. Every time someone walked past the help desk, I glanced up, half expecting someone to slow down at 308, reach for the door handle, and prove that the world was still predictable. No one did. 10 o'clock came and went. 308 remained an empty echoing box. Around 11, my coworker Janelle wandered over from her computer and leaned against the desk. "You look weirdly intense for a Wednesday," she said. "What's up?" "Do you know who R. Vance is?" I asked, gesturing at my screen. She squinted at it. The name's familiar. Why? "They've had 308 at 10 every day this week," I said, "but no one ever shows up." She shrugged. "Probably a flake, or someone who likes the feeling of control without actually using it." "That's specific," I said. She laughed. "Hey, some people reserve optimism and never show up for it." I rolled my eyes. "That doesn't even make sense." "Only because you're tired," she teased, pushing off the desk. "Don't worry about it. It's just a room." She went back to her computer. I tried to go back to ignoring it. I failed. Over the next 2 weeks, room 308 at 10 became a fixture. It was like sunrise or the line at the coffee cart downstairs. Reliable, predictable, weirdly comforting in its own way. Every weekday, same reservation. 308, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Reserved, R. Vance. Every weekday, same emptiness. Once, around day 10, I got up and wandered past the door at 10:15, pretending to straighten the laminated signs on the wall about quiet please and no food beyond this point. I peeked in through the glass, just to be absolutely sure. Nothing. No bag, no notebook, no jacket draped over a chair like a ghost of an intention. Just an untouched whiteboard and 4 chairs sitting politely around the square table. It bothered me more than it should have. Part of it was logistical. We'd had to turn away a couple of students who wanted a room at that time. When they asked, I'd point at the calendar and say, "Sorry, 308 is booked." And they'd glance over at the obviously empty glass cube and look back at me like I was personally hoarding spaces out of spite. Part of it, though, was just the mystery. Who reserves the same room at the same time, every day, and then never shows up? I started inventing stories in my head. Maybe R. Vance was a professor who'd forgotten they'd set up recurring reservations and now spent their mornings in a different building entirely, oblivious to the empty cube upstairs. Maybe it was a student trying to force themselves into a routine. I'll go to the library every day at 10, I swear, and then losing the daily battle with their alarm clock. Maybe it was someone who really needed the room for reasons that were slowly collapsing around them. Family emergency, illness, something heavy. And they just never got around to canceling in the system. I knew it wasn't my business. There was no policy against no-shows unless they were egregious about it. Technically, if no one was in the room 15 minutes after the start time, we could give it away to walk-ins, but people rarely showed up asking for a room that early, so it never came up. Still, every morning, my eyes found 308 on the screen. Eventually, I stopped pretending I wasn't obsessed. One slow afternoon, when the study room bookings were empty enough to not feel like I was failing someone, I clicked on the reservation details for 308. All it showed was the same thing I already knew: the name R. Vance, an email partially blurred for privacy, and a little checkbox that said, "Repeats weekdays." It had been initially created at the beginning of September. We were now well into November. That was a lot of empty mornings. I hovered my mouse over the email, tempted. We weren't really supposed to contact patrons unless there was a problem, but part of my brain kept nudging me. Isn't this kind of a problem? The rooms are a limited resource. People need them. Isn't it wasteful? I didn't send anything. I closed the window and told myself to mind my own business. Then one day it stopped. It was a Monday. I remember because I was already in a weird mood. One of those mornings where your coffee is somehow both too strong and too weak. Your inbox is full of messages that start with just following up, and your brain feels like it's running on last week's battery. I logged into the room reservation system out of habit, eyes automatically sliding to 308. Blank. No yellow bar. No reserved. R. Vance. Just an empty white rectangle waiting to be claimed. For a second, I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed the page. It stayed blank. "Everything okay?" Janelle asked from the printer. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I think 308 is free." She shrugged. "Cool. Someone else can use it." "Yeah," I repeated, like that was the whole story. All morning, I kept glancing through the glass walls down the hallway. People went in and out of other rooms, scribbled notes, debated things in hushed voices. 308 remained empty, but this time, with the reservation gone, it felt different. Not like a broken promise. Just like a room. Part of me was relieved. The weird tug-of-war between "it's none of my business" and "what the hell is going on" could finally end. Another part of me felt unreasonably sad, like the ending of a show I'd been quietly watching from the doorway. By noon, 308 had been claimed by a group of undergrads working on some project. They came in with hoodies and iced coffees, spread out their stuff across the table, and immediately started arguing about fonts. Life went on. I might have forgotten about it after a while. I might have just filed it away as one of those small, unsolved campus mysteries that fade with time. But a week later, I met them. The study rooms were busier than usual that day. It was the week before finals, that special time of year when everyone's stress levels peak and the library turns into a maze of open laptops and empty snack wrappers. We were totally booked. There were names in nearly every slot. Group projects, tutoring sessions, people simply writing "study" in all caps like they were trying to manifest focus into existence. Around 9:55, a person approached the desk. They had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a stack of printed articles in their arms. Dark hair pulled back in a quick, slightly messy bun. Oversized sweater, jeans, worn-out sneakers. There was a faint crease between their eyebrows, like thinking too hard had become a habit. "Hi," they said. "Do you know if room 308 is free at 10? I glanced at the screen automatically. "At 10? No, it's..." I stopped. "It wasn't reserved. It's actually open," I said. "Do you want it for 10 to 12? They let out a breath that was almost a sigh, almost a laugh. "Yeah, if that's okay. Under, Vance R." My brain clicked. "You're..." I said before I could stop myself. "You're our Vance?" They looked mildly startled. "Yeah?" I realized too late how weird that sounded. I scrambled to sound normal. "Sorry, I've seen the name a lot in the system, that's all." A faint flush rose to their cheeks. "Oh yeah, I used to book it regularly. Used to." The way they said it made something tug in my chest. I typed in the reservation, trying to pretend I wasn't desperately curious. "Okay, you're all set," I said, sliding a laminated in-use sign toward them. 308 from 10 to 12. "Thanks," they said. They picked up the sign, and after a brief pause, added, "Sorry if that was annoying." The recurring reservations, I mean. "We didn't have a policy against it," I said automatically. "That's not the same as not annoying," they said, a wry half-smile on their face. "Anyway, I appreciate it." They walked down the hallway toward 308, shoulders slightly hunched, like the air itself felt heavy. I watched them go, then forced myself to look back at my screen. People were lining up behind them now, asking for help with the printer, with the catalog, with the age-old question of why won't my laptop connect to the Wi-Fi? Life, as usual, didn't pause just because I'd stumbled across a main character in a story I'd been writing in my head, but my brain kept circling around the image of them sitting in 308, the empty room finally occupied. For the next 2 hours, every time the hallway came into view, I glanced at the door. Through the glass, I saw Vance, whoever they really were, sitting at the table with their papers spread out in front of them. Sometimes they were writing, sometimes just staring at nothing. Once, at around 11, I saw them lean back in the chair, close their eyes, and just breathe for a moment like the act of existing was heavier than whatever was in their backpack. When noon rolled around, they packed up slowly, almost reluctantly. As they passed the desk to drop off the in-use sign, they gave me a small nod. "Thanks again," they said. "No problem," I said. "Anytime." I meant it more than they probably realized. After that, anytime became sometimes. The recurring reservation stayed off the system, but every few days, around 9:50, our Vance would appear at the desk and ask, in that slightly tentative way, "Is 308 by any chance free?" Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. On the days it wasn't, they'd just nod, say, "That's okay," and either find a seat in the main area or leave entirely. I started to recognize the signs. There were days when they came in looking wired, eyes bright, movements sharp. On those days, they'd attack their work in 308 like it had personally offended them. Other days, they moved slower, like walking through water, and mostly stared at the same page for an hour. We didn't talk much at first. I'd check them in. They'd say thanks. Sometimes we'd exchange generic phrases like, "Busy up there today," or "Weather's awful again." Nothing that would make it into a movie script, but their presence became part of the pattern, the way the absence of their recurring reservation had been before. Then one morning, they were different. I noticed it as soon as they walked in. Their eyes were red-rimmed, like they'd either been crying or not sleeping. Their hair was more disheveled than usual, strands falling loose from the bun. They walked up to the desk like they were trying to remember how to move. "Hey," I said, before my brain could tell me that was too familiar. "Need 308? They stared at the screen for a moment, then nodded weakly. "If it's free." It was. I checked them in and handed over the sign. They took it, then hesitated. "Hey," they said, voice low. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Sure," I said, because what else do you say to that? "Do you ever book a place because you're trying to make a promise to yourself?" they asked. "Like if I reserve the room, I'll have to show up. And then when you don't show up, it feels like you're breaking a promise, but at least the promise existed for a second." I blinked. "That's specific," I said, unconsciously echoing what Janelle had said weeks ago. They laughed once, humorless. "Yeah, sorry, that's probably too much for 10 in the morning." "No," I said quickly. "I get it. I mean, I haven't done exactly that. But I do things like buying a new notebook and telling myself this one is where I'll get my life together." They looked at me, the faintest hint of a real smile cracking through the exhaustion. "How's that going for you?" "Terribly," I admitted. That got a genuine chuckle. "Yeah," they said. "Same idea, different props." They glanced at 308, then back at me. "Anyway, thanks for letting me hog that room for so long. I know it was probably annoying for you. I just wasn't ready to let go of the idea of it." "You don't have to explain," I said. "Really? I kind of want to," they said softly. "Just once, to someone who actually saw the calendar." Hesitated, the rational part of my brain saying this was not in my job description, and the human part saying who cares. The human part won. "We're not busy right now," I said. "If you want to sit for a second before starting, that's fine." They didn't sit, but they did lean against the edge of the desk, fingers tightening slightly on the plastic in-use sign. "I started booking 308 at 10 back in September," they said. "That part you probably saw. At first I did come. Every day, 10 to 12. It was my space." They swallowed. I could see their throat work. "My dad was in and out of the hospital a lot then," they continued. "Chemo, tests, all of that. I couldn't be with him all the time, and I couldn't do anything about the cancer. And at some point, my brain just couldn't handle the idea that everything was chaos. So I picked one thing that would not be chaos. 308, I said quietly. 308, they echoed. Every morning at 10. I told myself, no matter what else happens, you will be in that room at 10 with your laptop open. Maybe you'll work. Maybe you'll stare at nothing, but you'll be there. It made the days feel less like they were dissolving under my feet. They took a shaky breath. Then my dad got worse, they said, and my mornings became phone calls and doctors and the kind of logistics you never want to get good at. I kept the reservation though. In my head, I was still that person who went to 308 at 10, even when I was actually sitting in a waiting room across town, watching daytime TV on mute while they took him for scans. The crease between their brows deepened. I think part of me thought that as long as the reservation existed, there was still a version of my life where I was a regular student, they said. Where my dad was just a guy I called on Sundays, not 3 times a day, to check if he was still breathing. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that didn't sound like a greeting card. He died at the end of October, they said simply. That's when I stopped coming and didn't cancel the reservations. I remembered the week the grid had finally gone blank. Early November. I would open the app sometimes, they said, and see my name in that little box and think, at least somewhere, a future version of me is still going to a library at 10. I know that's not how time works, but grief is not known for its realism. They tried to smile. It came out twisted. Then one day I opened it, and I realized I was just making it harder for other people to get a room, they said. I don't want to be that person. So I unchecked the little repeat box, and suddenly it was like closing a door on that version of myself. They held up the in use sign a little. Today's the first day I've actually felt able to come back. I felt my own throat tighten. I'm sorry, I said, about your dad and about everything. Thanks, they said quietly. I know you're just the person at the desk, but you were also kind of the witness to the whole weird thing. It felt right to say it out loud at least once. I'm more than the person at the desk, I said, before my brain could stop my mouth. I'm also the person who noticed the empty room and made up like 10 different stories in my head about who you were and what you were doing. They blinked in surprise. Oh, I thought maybe you were a professor who forgot to cancel, I said, or someone who loved seeing their name on a calendar, or a very ambitious student who lost a battle with their alarm clock for 3 months straight. They snorted. Honestly, parts of those are accurate. We both laughed, and for a second, the heaviness in the air loosened. If it makes you feel any better, I added. We were allowed to give the room away if no one showed up after 15 minutes, so it wasn't completely wasted. That does make me feel a bit better, they said. It's weird how guilty you can feel over an empty glass cube. They straightened up, shoulders squaring a little. Anyway, they said, I'm going to actually use it today. My dad would be mad if he knew I booked a room and then stood in the hallway overthinking instead of going in. He sounds like he was practical, I said. He was, they replied. He liked things that had a clear purpose, tools, schedules, study rooms probably. He'd be proud you're here, I said before I could overthink it. They looked at me, eyes suddenly glossy. Yeah, they whispered. I hope so. They took the sign and walked down the hall to 308, this time with a different posture. Still tired, but more anchored somehow. After they disappeared inside, I sat back into my chair and stared at the screen for a moment. The words "in use" next to 308 seemed to mean more than they usually did. As the days went on, the pattern changed. There was no recurring reservation anymore. No yellow bar guaranteed to appear on the grid every weekday. But Vance, by that point, I'd started thinking of them as that. A whole person instead of just R, kept coming back. Sometimes they booked 308. Sometimes it was taken, and they'd accept 310 or 304 or whatever else was free without complaint. Sometimes they just found a table near the window and spread their papers out in the open. They didn't always look okay. Grief isn't a linear thing. Some days, they seemed almost normal, joking with the graduate assistant who roamed the floor, typing fast, focused. Other days, their eyes were distant, their movements slow. Once, I saw them sitting alone in 308, not working at all, just staring at a single photo propped up against their water bottle. From my desk, I could see the edge of a man's shoulder, a hint of gray hair. I put two and two together and looked away. Giving them a privacy they probably didn't realize they had already lost by choosing a glass room. We started talking more often in small increments. They'd come to the desk to borrow markers or ask for more scrap paper. Sometimes they'd make a joke about how quiet the third floor was, like a library within a library. Occasionally, they'd bring a coffee for me and Janelle, claiming the place down the street had messed up their order and accidentally given them too many. Once, when the afternoon sun hit the windows just right and the whole hallway was bathed in soft light, they stood by the desk for a minute and watched the dust motes float. "It looks different up here," they said. "How so?" I asked. "Downstairs, the library feels like proof that the world keeps moving," they said. "People coming in and out, printers screaming, someone always dropping a book. Up here, it feels like time takes its shoes off before walking." I thought that was one of the prettiest descriptions of the third floor I'd ever heard. "Is that good?" What I asked. "Depends on the day," they said with a small smile. "On good days, it's comforting. On bad days, it feels like I'm the only one stuck." "You're not," I said. "I've seen a lot of people get stuck here." "Yeah?" they asked. "Do they get unstuck?" "Mostly," I said, "or they at least learn to move with it." They hummed thoughtfully at that and went back to their room. I didn't tell them that sometimes, when my own thesis felt like a mountain instead of a stack of pages, I came up to the third floor and just sat in one of the empty rooms after my shift ended, watching the late afternoon light fade and convincing myself that sitting there counted as progress. One evening, near the end of the semester, I was closing up the third floor. Part of the job was doing a quick sweep to make sure no one was hiding in a corner, headphones on, oblivious to the library closing in 15 minutes announcement. When I passed 308, Vance was still inside. The room was dark except for the desk lamp, which cast a small circle of light around their notebook. They were writing, forehead resting on one hand. I knocked gently on the glass and opened the door a crack. "Hey," I said, "we're closing in a few." They blinked like they were surfacing from underwater. "Oh, right, sorry, lost track of time." "It happens," I said. "Some people think it's still morning when we kick them out." They snorted and started packing up. As they slipped the photo into their bag, it fell out of the folder and landed face up on the table. Before they could grab it, I caught a clearer glimpse. An older man sitting at a picnic table, mid-laugh, a slice of cake on a paper plate in front of him. "My dad," they said, seeing where I was looking. That was last year. He'd just declared himself the cake quality inspector at my cousin's birthday. "He looks kind," I said. "He was," they replied softly, sliding the photo carefully back into the folder. "Very serious about cake." We both smiled. As they shrugged into their backpack, they hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" they said. "Sure," and I replied. "Do you ever feel like the places where you struggled the most become weirdly important to you?" they asked. "Like you want to move on, but also you don't want to lose the version of yourself that survived here." I thought about the desk, where I'd had my first full-blown panic attack over citing sources correctly. The corner table where I'd written my first coherent thesis paragraph. The hallway where I'd cried in a bathroom stall after getting a rejection email, then walked out and reshelved books like nothing happened. "Yeah," I said, "all the time." They nodded slowly, like my answer had confirmed something for them. "I think that's why I kept booking 308, they said, even when I couldn't come. I wasn't ready to let go of the version of me who was just a student in a study room. No hospital rooms, no doctors, just highlighters and coffee stains. That version of you still exists," I said. "You're literally standing in a study room with a backpack full of papers." They laughed, and this time it was lighter. Fair point. We walked down the hallway together, the quiet of the third floor settling around us like a blanket. At the elevator, they turned to me. Hey, they said. Thanks for not treating me like a scheduling inconvenience. You're welcome, I said. Thanks for making my job more interesting than just yelling at printers. I thought that was 80% of the job, they said. 90, I corrected. 10% is mysterious recurring reservations. We both smiled. After that semester ended, things changed for both of us. They graduated a year later. Thesis printed and bound and placed on a shelf somewhere in the back where only future sleep-deprived students would ever see their name and think, who is that? I finished mine too, eventually, after enough caffeine and late nights to fuel a small meteor. I left the library job when I moved to a different city. On my last day, I walked up to the third floor alone and stood in the hallway looking at the line of study rooms. 308 was empty. The whiteboard was clean. The chairs were pushed in. It looked like any other room. I thought about all the people who'd sat in there, the group of undergrads arguing about fonts, the guy who'd once fallen asleep with his face pressed against an open textbook, me hiding from my own deadlines, and Vance trying to build a little island of routine in the middle of a storm. On impulse, I went inside and closed the door behind me. The hum of the building became a faint background noise. I sat at the table, pulled a pen out of my pocket, and wrote one small sentence on the corner of the whiteboard. Someone got through a hard time here. I erased it right after. Leaving stray graffiti wasn't exactly the legacy I wanted. But for a brief moment, it felt right. Then I turned off the lamp and left the room. Years later, whenever I walk into a library that has study rooms, my eyes go straight to the little schedules taped near the doors. Names and time slots, reserved spaces inside an unpredictable world. I don't work the desk anymore. I don't see the back end of those reservations. But sometimes when I spot a name repeated in the same time slot over and over, I feel a tiny flicker of recognition. Some people reserve rooms for group projects, some for exams, some just for the comfort of a glass box where the world feels temporarily controllable. And some, I've learned, reserve them as a promise to themselves that somewhere, sometime, they will sit down with their life and try to make sense of it. Not all of those reservations get used. Life intervenes. Hospitals intervene. Grief steps in and rearranges everything. But the rooms are there, waiting, holding space for versions of us that are still trying. When I think of room 308 now, I don't see an empty cube on a screen anymore. I see a person leaning on a desk at 10 in the morning, hands trembling a little around a plastic sign, telling a stranger with a name tag the truth about why their name kept showing up in the system. I see a place where chaos got paused for a couple of hours at a time, even if the work didn't always get done. And every time I pass a quiet study room in a library somewhere, I think, someone's story is unfolding in there. Someone is reserving more than just a table and a chair. They might never know that someone else noticed, but sometimes just knowing that the space exists and that it once held you when you needed it makes the rest of the world feel a little less impossible. Our second story is about a man who always arrived at a small cafe in the very last 10 minutes before closing, and how that quiet little routine slowly turned into something much more meaningful. So get comfortable. Let the day go for a while, and let's begin. I used to think nothing interesting ever happened in the last 10 minutes before closing. By that point in the night, the cafe felt like a stage after the play was over. The lights were still on, the chairs were still there, but the energy had drained out of the room. The music was a little too quiet, the floor a little too sticky, and the only people who usually came in were the ones who'd forgotten we closed at 9 and looked mildly offended that time existed. I worked the evening shift 3 or 4 days a week. It was mostly students and remote workers during the day, then couples and people on their laptops in the early evening, then a slow fizzle toward closing. We'd start wiping the tables, flipping the reserved signs, stacking plates, all that quiet choreography of, we're still polite, but we're also very much done. The first time I noticed him, it was one of those rainy nights where everyone in the city seemed to agree to be tired at the same time. We'd had a rush around 7, the kind where the espresso machine doesn't stop hissing and you forget your own name for a bit. By 8:30, the place had calmed down. By 8:50, it was just me, my coworker Alina, and a couple in the corner splitting a slice of carrot cake, whispering like they were in a library. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes. Freedom is in sight, Alina said quietly as she wiped the front counter. What's the first thing you're doing when you get home? Shower, I said. Then I'm not talking to another human being until tomorrow midday. Jealous, she sighed. I have a morning shift. The door chimed. We both looked up. A man stepped in, shaking a few raindrops off his coat. He paused just inside. The way people do when they're checking whether they are too late. His eyes flicked to the open sign, still lit, then to us. Hi, I said automatically. We're open. He nodded, almost in relief, and came up to the counter. He wasn't old, but he wasn't college age either. Somewhere in that vague, late 30s, early 40s realm that's hard to pin down. Dark hair with a few stray gray strands at the temple, a bit of stubble he hadn't bothered to shave clean. He wore a navy coat, damp at the shoulders, and decent office shoes that looked tired. What can I get for you? I asked. Just a small latte, please, he said. His voice was soft but clear. No rush, no impatience. To stay or to go? He glanced around the empty tables. To stay, if that's okay. Sure, I said. We close at 9, but you've got a few minutes. That's perfect, he replied, like he'd planned it, that way. I made his latte, the motion so familiar my hands could have done it without me. He waited quietly, hands in his pockets, eyes on the pastry case like he was looking without really seeing. When I set the cup on the counter and told him the total, he paid with cash, actual bills and coins, which was rare enough to notice. He took the latte, thanked me, and picked a table by the window near the back, where the reflections from the streetlights blurred on the glass. He didn't take out a laptop or a book. He just sat there, both hands around the warm cup, staring at the window and occasionally taking small sips. We cleaned around him. I wiped the table next to his. Alina stacked the last tray of plates in the back. The couple in the corner left quietly, dropping their plates off at the counter and whispering a good night. By the time I flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, he'd drank about half the latte. I checked the clock. 9:02. I always feel a little awkward with the stragglers. You don't want to rush people out, but you also don't want to still be there at 10 because someone decided to write their novel's climax in your cafe at closing time. We don't have anyone else here, Alina murmured as she tied her apron strings into a loose knot. Let him sit for a few minutes. We're still doing dishes anyway. Yeah, I said, it's fine. At 9:07, he stood up. He took his empty cup to the bin, put it in gently instead of tossing it, and walked to the counter. Thanks, he said. Sorry for coming so late. No worries, I said and meant it. Have a good night. You too, he replied. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rainy street like he'd been a small, quiet interruption in our normal closing routine. If it had just been that one time, I probably wouldn't have thought about him again. But he came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Always in the last 10 minutes before closing, always ordering the same thing, a small latte to stay, always sitting at the same table by the window, hands around the cup, eyes on the glass like it held something only he could see. The pattern snuck up on me. It wasn't like, ah, here is the mysterious recurring man. It was more like, oh, there he is again, and then, that's 3 times this week. And eventually, okay, something's going on here. After about a week, Alina started noticing too. Your boyfriend's here, she murmured one evening as she passed by with a tray. He's not my boyfriend, I said automatically. She smirked. You look at him like you're trying to guess his favorite audiobook genre. I do not. Fine, she said. You look at him like a bored barista who has finally been given a side quest. Closer, I admitted. We didn't know anything about him, really. He didn't talk much beyond the order. He never took phone calls there. He didn't scroll through social media or tap away on a laptop like most of our regulars. He just sat. Sometimes he seemed tense, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Other nights he looked almost peaceful, like the 20 minutes between 8:50 and 9:10 were the only time he let his guard down. One Thursday when the weather had finally decided to be dry and chilly, instead of wet and chilly, he didn't come in at 8:50. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him. I was just doing my job, wiping tables, refilling the sugar caddies, checking the espresso machine. Then it was 8:57, then 8:59. I flipped the sign at 9, trying not to feel stupidly disappointed about a stranger's absence. At 9:03, the door chimed. He stepped in, slightly out of breath, coat half zipped. "Oh," he said when he saw the sign. "I'm sorry, I thought I'd make it." "We're technically closed," I said, "but we haven't shut everything down yet. I can still make you something if it's quick." His shoulders dropped a little in relief. "I'd really appreciate that," he said. "Same as usual, if that's okay." "Small latte?" I asked. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, then softened into something like gratitude. "Yeah," he said, "that." As I made the drink, Alina started stacking chairs a bit further away, humming quietly to herself, giving us a little bubble of space. I slid the cup across the counter. "Rough day?" I asked, then immediately second-guessed myself. Maybe he didn't want small talk. Maybe he just wanted caffeine and solitude. He hesitated, then let out a little breath that was half laugh, half sigh. "Very," he said, "but this part is the good part." He went to his usual table and sat down. He didn't linger as long as usual, 10 minutes, maybe 15, but his face relaxed as he drank. Like something inside him was untangling. That was the first time I realized that for him, this wasn't just a random habit. It was something else. A ritual, maybe. A tiny fixed point in a day that probably didn't have a lot of softness in it. After that, when he'd come in, we'd say a couple more words each night. "How's your evening going so far?" he'd ask politely as I pulled the shot. "Better now that the rush is over," I'd say. "Busy day?" I'd ask. "Always," he'd say, with a small, tired smile. Nothing dramatic, just small stitches of conversation, sewing themselves into the repeated pattern. We didn't even know his name. We called him Last 10 Minutes Guy when he wasn't around. A few weeks into this quiet arrangement, our manager, Sean, did a surprise closing inspection. He'd walk through the cafe around 9, clipboard in hand, pretending not to enjoy the power, and check that the milk was put away, the pastries were covered, the machines cleaned properly. He came by the wholesome register at 9:05, just as Last 10 minutes. Guy was sitting by the window with his latte. "You've still got someone in here?" Sean asked, glancing at him. "Yeah," I said. "He just came in." "We close at 9, Sean said slowly, like I'd forgotten how clocks worked. "I know," I said. "He's usually gone by 9:15. We're still cleaning anyway." Sean looked unconvinced. "We can't be letting people hang out half an hour after closing," he muttered. "It extends everyone's shift." "It's not half an hour," I said, "and I'm already here. It's fine." "We need to be more strict about it," he said, scribbling something on his clipboard like I'd failed a test. Later, when we were taking out the trash, I complained about it to Alina. "I swear he wants the cafe empty at exactly 9:00 so he can sprint home to his PlayStation," I grumbled. "He likes rules," she said. "He thinks they stop the world from falling apart." "They're closing a cafe, not managing an airport," I said. She chuckled. "Give it a week. He'll forget to enforce it." He didn't forget exactly, but he got distracted by inventory and supplier calls, and the enforce 9 sharp rule faded a little, like most of his initiatives did. So Last 10 minutes, Guy kept coming. One slow Monday, it was just me and him in the cafe after 8:30. Alina had called in sick, and the earlier staff had already left. The place felt bigger when it was empty, like the walls were farther apart than usual. He came in at his usual 8:50, ordered his small latte, and this time, instead of going straight to sit down, he lingered at the counter. "Do you ever get tired of the smell of coffee?" he asked. I shook my head. "Never. It's the people that wear me out." He laughed quietly. "Fair." He looked like he had more he wanted to say, but wasn't sure if it was allowed. "We're pretty dead tonight," I said, gesturing at the empty room. "You're not interrupting anything. Dangerous thing to tell someone who already shows up at the last minute," he said. I waited. He looked down at his latte and traced the rim of the lid with his thumb for a second before speaking. "It's probably obvious," he said, "but I time it like this on purpose." "The last 10 minutes?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "I have a long day. I don't always have energy for people, but I like having this one. Small space where someone is still awake and the lights are on, but it's quiet." He seemed almost embarrassed by the admission. "It makes sense," I said. "Honestly, this is my favorite part of the shift. When everyone's gone and the city's calmed down a bit." He looked relieved, like I'd passed some kind of test. "Then I don't feel as weird," he said. "I didn't say you're not weird," I said lightly. "Just that you have good timing." He smiled at that. Really smiled. The first unguarded one I'd seen from him. It made his face look younger, less worn down around the eyes. "I'm Daniel, by the way," he said, like it had just occurred to him we'd skipped that part. I told him my name. "Nice to officially meet you," he said. "I was worried I'd just be that guy who won't go home in your head forever." "Too late," I said. "You'll always be last 10 minutes guy in the staff chat." He laughed, then shook his head. "I deserve that." He took his latte and went to his table, and I went back to wiping down the counters, but the air felt lighter after that. Naming him made him feel more real somehow. Once you learn someone's name, it's harder to treat them like background noise. After that, we fell into a slightly different pattern. He still came in just before closing most nights. He still ordered the same small latte. But now, there was a little more intentional conversation. "How was your day, Daniel?" I'd ask. He'd shrug or sigh, or occasionally say, "Surprisingly okay." He started asking about my thesis, about the classes I was juggling, about why I'd chosen evening shifts instead of mornings. I learned that he worked in an office a few blocks away, that his commute wasn't long, but he stretched it out anyway, that he used to hate coffee until his late 20s. "Something changed?" I asked once, handing over his cup. "I changed," he said. "Got more tired." We both laughed a little too knowingly. One evening in winter, snow started falling around 8. Not a blizzard, just soft flakes drifting down in the streetlight glow. The cafe always goes quieter on snowy nights. People either go home earlier or decide it's a hot chocolate and Netflix evening, not a sit under fluorescent lights with strangers one. By 8:45, the cafe was empty. "You think he'll still come tonight?" Alina asked, rinsing out the milk pitchers. I glanced out the window. The snow had started to stick to the sidewalks, turning them into mush. "Probably," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. Sure enough, at 8:52, the door chimed and Daniel walked in, snowflakes melting on his coat, hair speckled white. "You really don't take nights off, huh?" I said. "If I go straight home, I might not come back out till spring," he replied. "Small latte, please." "Have you ever thought of mixing it up?" I asked as I tamped the grounds. "Getting a hot chocolate or tea or anything that doesn't involve espresso and your adrenal glands staging a coup?" He pretended to think. "I like to maintain my brand," he said. "You wouldn't recognize me without the latte." "True," I said. "You'd just be some guy in a coat." "Terrifying," he said, with a little smile. As I handed him the cup, a gust of wind rattled the window a bit harder than before. "Roads are gonna be a mess," Alina muttered. "You walking?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said. "It's not far." He went to his table, but instead of staring out at the street like usual, he just watched the snow for a few minutes, lips pressed together in a thoughtful line. The clock ticked past 9. Sean wasn't on duty that night, so there was no clipboard to worry about. Alina and I started our closing routine more slowly than usual. At 9:05, I wandered over with a rag to wipe down the nearby table, more as an excuse than anything else. "Need us to call you a cab?" I asked. He shook his head. I'll be okay, he said. I like the walk, actually. The city feels different when everyone else has decided it's time to go inside. You say that like you're not a person, I said. He smiled faintly. Sometimes I don't feel like one, he said. More like an observer with a coffee. The way he said it was gentle, not dramatic, but something in the tone made me pause. Is it that bad? I asked quietly. He seemed surprised by the question, then looked down at his hands, turning the cup slowly. It's just a lot, he said. Work, family, life, all the layers. He made a vague gesture, like he was trying to describe something too big for words. The day is all edges. This part, he nodded around the cafe, is the one soft bit at the end. I thought about that. I'd always liked the closing shift for purely practical reasons. No early alarms, fewer people, more tips from tired office workers buying dessert. I hadn't thought of it as the soft bit before, but once he said it, it clicked. That makes sense, I said. He looked up, studying my face like he was checking if I was just saying that to be polite. I'm glad you get it, he said. I sometimes worry I'm just clinging to a routine, like a raccoon to a shiny object. Hey, I said, if the routine works, keep it. Better a shiny object than nothing. He chuckled. You're surprisingly pro-raccoon. Big fan of chaos creatures, I said. Helps me justify my own life choices. We both smiled. His shoulders had lost some of their tension. He left around 9:12 that night, scarf wrapped more tightly than before, footprints already half filled by fresh snow on the sidewalk. Weeks turned into months. I found myself structuring my own evenings around his visits more than I wanted to admit. I'd make sure the milk was topped up and the machine cleaned early so I could pull his shot fresh at 8:50 without juggling too much. On days when I was tired or burnt out, I looked forward to those small, familiar interactions as much as my own break. It's funny how quickly someone can slip into your routine without you fully noticing. Then, for the first time in a long while, he didn't come in at all. It was a Tuesday in late February. The weather was that unpleasant in between, not so cold enough to snow prettily, not warm enough to be pleasant, just gray and damp. The kind of day that makes the whole world feel like a waiting room. 8:30 came and went. The cafe was quiet. Think he's okay? Alina asked at 8:50, wiping down the espresso machine. He probably just has something going on, I said, trying not to sound as worried as I felt. At 9, I flipped the sign. At 9:05, I forced myself to stop glancing at the door every 30 seconds. He didn't show. He didn't show the next night either. Or the next. It's strange how much you can miss someone you've never actually hung out with outside of their routine order. But that's how it was. The last 10 minutes before closing felt emptier. The cafe felt more like a workplace and less like, I don't know, a little pocket of someone's life. A week later, I was walking home after closing. The city lights blurred slightly from the light drizzle. My path took me past a bus stop I'd walked by 1,000 times without really seeing who stood there. That night, I saw him. Daniel was sitting on the bench, shoulders hunched, no coat on, even though the air was cold enough to nip at your fingers. He was wearing a hospital wristband. I stopped without thinking. He was staring at the ground, eyes unfocused. There was a paper bag on the seat next to him with a pharmacy logo on it. Daniel? I said before my brain could remind me that we were technically strangers outside the cafe. His head snapped up. For a second, he looked like he didn't recognize me. Then his expression softened, like someone returning to themselves. Hey, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Sorry, I didn't expect to see you here. Me neither, I said. Are you okay? He glanced at the hospital bracelet, then gave a little lopsided smile. Yes, he said. Well, more or less. It's not me, it's my mom. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the hospital, which was a few blocks away. She's been in and out for a while, he said. Tonight they let her go home. I'm just waiting for my brother to pick us up. The bus schedule is a nightmare from here. Is she going to be okay? I asked. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, something deep in the eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. "We're in that stage where they say things like, 'We'll see how she responds, and we'll take it day by day.'" "Those phrases should come with hazard warnings," I said quietly. He huffed a little. "Yeah." For a moment, we just stood there in the humid air, the bus stop glowing a pale yellow around us. "I noticed you weren't coming in," I said. I mean, I didn't mean to notice, but I kind of did. "Yeah," he said. "I kept thinking I'd make it, but visiting hours and paperwork and all of that kept running late." He looked up at me then, like he was afraid of what I'd say next. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "I know I'm just a customer, but I didn't want you to think I was ditching my weird little coffee ritual without saying anything." "I thought you were cheating on us with another cafe," I said. He actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. "Never," he said. "I have brand loyalty." We both smiled, and the tension in my chest loosened a little. "You know," I said, "if you ever need something warm to sit with between hospital and home, we're still there most nights." "Yeah," he said, "I've missed it. More than I expected." For a second, he looked like he might say more. Then headlights turned the corner and a car started slowing down near the curb. "That's my brother," he said. He grabbed the pharmacy bag and stood up. "Thanks," he said, "for stopping. I don't have a lot of people to bump into who know me as anything other than the son at the hospital." "Well," I said, "to me you'll always be last 10 minutes guy. Very prestigious title." He bowed his head slightly like I'd knighted him. "I'll try to live up to it," he said. I watched him get into the car, help an older woman into the back seat, his mom, I guessed, then drive off into the damp night. The next week, he came back to the cafe. The first night, he arrived at 8:40 instead of 8:50. He ordered the usual. His eyes looked redder than usual, but he seemed a little more at ease. "I saw your wristband the other day," I said quietly as I handed him his latte. "I hope your mom's feeling a little better." "She's..." He paused, searching for the right words. "She's home, which is something. The doctors aren't sure how much more they can actually do, but she says her own bed is a miracle cure. So who knows? Nothing beats your own pillow," I said. He smiled. "She's addicted to daytime TV," he added. "That's probably the real medicine." We chatted for a few more minutes. He went to his table as usual. The night felt closer to our old normal. After that, the cafe became part of the route between the hospital, his mom's apartment, and his own place. Some nights, he'd come in looking exhausted and quiet. Other nights, almost lighter, like he'd had a good conversation or a good day with her. He started staying a little longer sometimes, until 9:20 occasionally. If we weren't in a rush, he'd help us put chairs up as a way of apologizing. "You don't have to do that," I told him once as he flipped a chair onto a table. "I know," he said. "I just feel bad for being the ghost in the corner every night." "You're not a ghost," I said. "You're more like part of the furniture now." "Ah," he said, "every man's dream, to be compared to a chair." "A good chair," I clarified. "The one everyone wants, because it doesn't wobble." He laughed, and the sound filled the empty cafe in a way I really liked. One slow night, when there were no other customers in the last half hour, he lingered at the counter with his drink instead of sitting down. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "How do you not bring this place home with you?" he asked. "All these people, all their moods, everything. You see them come in, tired, stressed, upset. How do you not carry it all?" "I definitely do sometimes," I said honestly. "There are days I get home and my brain feels like a lost and found box, full of stuff that doesn't belong to me." He nodded like he understood that very well. "I'm still figuring out how to put it down," I added. "But it helps that there's a clear end to the day. We mop the floor, we turn off the lights, and at some point, the only thing left to do is lock the door." "Must be nice to have a door to close," he said softly. "You don't?" I asked. "Some days it feels like my life is all hallway, no doors," he said. "Work bleeds into family, family bleeds into worry, worry bleeds into insomnia. The only real door, if you can call it that, is this place." I walk in, I get my coffee, I sit down, and for 10 minutes, nothing else is allowed to knock. That's probably why you come at the very end, I said, so you know it won't be interrupted. Maybe, he said, or maybe I just have a flair for the dramatic. He sipped his latte, then added more quietly, sometimes I feel stupid, caring so much about a cup of coffee in a half-empty cafe. It's not about the coffee, I said. He looked at me then, and whatever he saw in my expression made his shoulders loosen. No, he agreed, it's not. Spring came slowly. The evening got lighter. People started sitting outside more. Our rush shifted a bit later. Iced lattes and cold brew became the stars of the menu. Daniel's routine shifted too, but only slightly. Some nights he came in closer to 8:30. Others, he slipped back into his old 8:50 slot. He started occasionally getting a small slice of lemon loaf with his latte, like he'd finally allowed himself a small indulgence. Branching out, I see, I said the first time he ordered it. My mom insists I eat something if I'm drinking coffee at night, he said. She doesn't know I used to have it black on an empty stomach. I'm trying to stay in her good books while I still can. Then take 2 slices, I said. Her orders, right? He grinned. I'll tell her the barista supports her health campaign. Tell her the barista says to add vegetables and water too, I said. Balance, he shook his head. I'm not giving her more ammunition. She already calls to ask if I've fed myself properly, like I'm still 15. We shared a smile, a little bittersweet at the edges. Sometimes he'd tell me small stories about her, how she used to make grilled cheese sandwiches whenever he was sick, how she'd stay up late knitting in the living room when he was out as a teenager, pretending she wasn't waiting for him to come home, how she'd recently started calling the hospital the hotel to make everyone less tense. She's annoyingly good at being gentle about things that terrify me, he said once. That's kind of a superpower, I replied. Yeah, he said. I can't imagine the world without it. The way he said it lingered in my mind long after my shift that night. Then one evening in early summer, he didn't come in. At first, I didn't panic. Life happens. Schedules change. Buses get delayed. I reminded myself of all the times I'd assumed something dramatic, and it had just been, fell asleep on the couch. The next night, he didn't come either. By the third night, the cafe felt wrong without him. Have you heard anything? Alina asked quietly after closing, when we were both counting the till. How would I said, more harshly than I intended. He's just a customer. She gave me a look that said I wasn't fooling anyone. You ran outside in the rain that one time to tell him he'd forgotten his scarf, she reminded me. He's not just anything to you. I opened my mouth to argue, then shut it again. I saw him by the hospital a while back, I said. His mom was really sick. Oh, she said softly. Do you think? I don't know, I said. I spent the next couple of days, jumping a little, whenever the door chimed, half expecting him to walk in, half dreading he wouldn't. A week passed. Then, on a Wednesday that had been entirely ordinary up to that point, he came through the door at 8:45. I knew something was wrong as soon as I saw his face. His eyes were red. His shoulders seemed smaller somehow, like he was trying to fold in on himself. He moved with the automatic slowness of someone whose body was still remembering how to be in the world after being somewhere else entirely. He came up to the counter and opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he'd forgotten how to do even simple things. Hey, I said softly. Small latte? He nodded. His voice was hoarse when he said, please. I made it silently. The hiss of the steam wand sounded too loud in the quiet cafe. When I set the cup down, I said, do you want it in a mug today? Not a paper cup? I don't know why I asked. We usually defaulted to disposable cups at that hour, easier for cleanup, but something about that night felt like it needed ceramic. He swallowed once, then nodded. Yeah, he said, a mug would be nice. I poured the latte into one of our wide, heavy mugs, the blue one he'd once complimented months ago, and set it gently on the counter. He wrapped his hands around it like it was something solid in a world that had gone watery. "Do you," I started, then hesitated. "Do you want to take it to your usual table?" He looked over at the corner by the window, then back at me. "I think I'd rather stay here, if that's okay," he said quietly. I glanced at the empty cafe. "That's okay," I said. He leaned his elbows on the counter, mug between his hands, and took a breath that shook a little. "My mom died on Sunday," he said. I felt my chest tighten. "I'm so sorry," I said. He nodded like he'd been expecting that response and didn't quite know what to do with it. "We had the funeral today," he added. "My brother's gone home to his kids. The house is very quiet." The last two words carried a weight that didn't match their simplicity. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "I got off the train and just ended up here." "You picked a good place," I said softly. "We have coffee and chairs and no expectations." He huffed a tiny, tired laugh. "That's exactly the level of complexity I can handle right now." We stood there for a moment, the hum of the fridge and the soft background music filling the spaces between words. "She loved coffee shops," he said suddenly, staring into the steam rising from his mug. "She said they were rooms that didn't belong to anyone, but still welcomed you." I thought that was a weird way to put it when I was younger. Now it makes more sense. "It does," I said. "Less commitment than a restaurant, more structure than a park bench." "Exactly," he said. "Just a place to be." He took a sip, then set the mug down carefully. I kept thinking the day would, I don't know, feel cinematic or something, he said. Like it'd have this clear emotional arc, but it was all paperwork and logistics and, "Would you like to see her one more time?" And people asking if we've considered grief counseling and dropping off casseroles like we're a donation box for lasagna. "There's no good script for that," I said quietly. "No," he agreed. "There's just the next minute and then the next." He stared at the counter, fingers tracing the faint scratches in the wood. "I kept thinking about coming here," he went on, "at the hospital, at the funeral home, at my mom's place." It was like this fixed point at the end of the day that my brain kept orbiting. "You don't have to apologize for that," I said. "Spaces can hold people too." He nodded slowly. "I know I'm just some guy who comes in before closing," he said. "But I wanted you to know that this place, and you, and this dumb little latte routine, it mattered. It still matters." His voice shook on the last word. He looked away quickly, wiping at his eyes. "Hey," I said gently, "you're not just some guy. You're Daniel. Your last 10 minutes guy. You're the reason I don't hate this part of my shift." He let out a half sob, half laugh at that. "I don't know whether to say thank you or apologize," he said. "How about you're welcome and I'm sorry about your mom can coexist," I said. He nodded, eyes still wet. We didn't say much after that. He finished his latte in small sips. I quietly continued wiping counters and stacking cups, giving him space without leaving him completely alone. At 9:20, he straightened up, like he'd made some internal decision. "Can I ask you one more weird question?" he said. "Always," I said. "If I keep coming in at the end of the day," he said, "after this, after everything, would that be okay? Or is there a statute of limitations on grief coffee?" "No statute of limitations," I said. "You can keep your slots as long as you want. We'll pretend we're a very exclusive club, and you're the only member." He smiled weakly. "Membership has its privileges," he said. "Free extra napkins," I added. "Truly luxurious," he said. He reached into his pocket like he was going to pay, but I shook my head. "On the house," I said. "You don't have to." "I know," I said. "But let me do one small thing that isn't wiping tables." He looked at me, something like relief and gratitude mingling in his expression. "Thank you," he said. "Really." He left a few minutes later, moving a little less heavily than when he came in. After he was gone, Alina, who had been quietly restocking the fridge a few feet away, came up to the counter. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm not the one who lost my mom," I said. "That's not what I asked," she replied. I leaned my hands on the counter and took a deep breath. I'm Sad, I said honestly, and also weirdly honored that he came here, that this is where he wanted to be. She nodded. That's what I like about this place, she said. We're not saving lives, but sometimes we get to be the soft landing. Yeah, I said. That sounds about right. After that, our routine continued, altered by grief, the way everything in life eventually is. Daniel still came in most nights near closing. Some evenings, he was almost back to his old self, tired but joking, making small comments about his day. Other nights, he was quieter, eyes dimmer, like the weight of loss was sitting on his shoulders. We didn't talk about his mom every time. Sometimes we talked about nothing at all. The weather, a weird customer from earlier, a show we'd both accidentally started watching, but there was a new layer to our dynamic, something unspoken but solid. He knew that I knew this wasn't just about coffee. I knew that he knew that I was paying attention. One night, months later, when the worst of the acute grief seemed to have settled into that long, low ache people carry forever, he came in a little earlier than usual, around 8:30. I'm branching out, he said, setting his hands on the counter. I'm trying a different time slot. We'll have to check the rules with management, I said. You might violate your last 10 minutes guy contract. Let them sue me, he said, smiling. Small latte, please. As I made it, he watched the machine, a faintly thoughtful look on his face. You know, he said slowly, I still sometimes feel like I'm walking around an outline of my life instead of living inside it. That's a very accurate description of being alive, I said. But, he added, I also have these little anchors coming here, calling my brother on Sundays, making my mom's grilled cheese recipe when I'm sad. They're small, but they keep me from floating off completely. Soft bits in a sharp day, I said, remembering his earlier phrase. Yeah, he said, looking at me. Exactly. He took his latte, went to sit by the window, and this time he took out a small notebook. I watched him write for a while, head bent, pen moving slowly. Later, as he brought his empty mug back to the counter, I nodded at the notebook. Writing something good? I asked. Not sure good is the word, he said, but I'm trying to actually be in my own story, instead of just narrating other people's in my head. That's a big step, I said, coming from the person who has witnessed my main character syndrome in the last 10 minutes of every business day, he said. I'll take it. We both laughed. Time moved on. Staff came and went. Sean eventually did leave to take a job at an actual airport, which felt weirdly fitting. Alina found a full-time job in her field and cut back on shifts. The cafe changed the menu design twice. They painted the walls a slightly different shade of off-white. Daniel kept coming in. Some weeks he missed a day or two. Sometimes he came in earlier and sat for longer, blending in with the regular evening crowd. Other times, he kept his old habit, slipping in just before closing, claiming a brief, beautiful, quiet sliver of the day when the world had mostly decided to be done. If you walked into the cafe at 8:52 on a random Tuesday, you wouldn't think you were seeing anything remarkable. Just a tired man ordering a small latte, a barista wiping down the counter, a few chairs stacked in the background. But for me, those ordinary moments became some of the most important ones of that time in my life. They taught me that you can exist in someone's story in a small, steady way without ever doing anything dramatic. You can be the person who remembers their drink, who doesn't rush them out, who understands that the last 10 minutes in a cafe can be the safest part of someone's day. I don't work there anymore. I finished school. I moved to a different job, different neighborhood, different routine. But sometimes, when I pass a cafe late in the evening and see someone slip in just before closing, I think of Daniel. I imagine them sitting at a table, hands around a warm cup, letting the edges of their day soften a little. And I hope, wherever he is now, that he still has a place like that. A room with lights on and low music, a barista who knows his order, a small window of time when it's okay to just be a person holding a coffee and breathing. Because in a world that can feel like one long hallway, Those little doors we open for each other, a chair, a mug. You're not just some guy, matter more than we think. Our third story is about a quiet regular at a small old movie theater, a man who always chose the same seat, week after week, as if that little patch of worn upholstery was holding his life together. Settle in, let the lights dim around you, and let's begin. I've always liked movie theaters more than movies. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy a good film. I can argue about story arcs and soundtracks and character development like anyone else who spent too much time online. But what really gets to me is the space itself, that moment when the lights go down and the screen glows just a little, and everyone in the room quietly agrees to look at the same thing for a while. It feels like a truce. The world outside pauses. Phones go dark. People stop performing. For 2 hours, nobody expects you to be productive or interesting. You just have to sit there and let the story happen in front of you. The little theater near my apartment was exactly the kind of place built for that kind of truce. It used to be a much bigger deal, from what I'd heard. Back in the day, before streaming and megaplexes and unlimited monthly passes. It was a single-screen neighborhood cinema. Big bright marquee, line around the block on Friday nights, sticky floors, kids throwing popcorn. It had a different name then, something grand. The Rialto, I think. By the time I moved into the neighborhood, the place had been renamed Starline Cinema and cut up into 3 small screening rooms. The marquee still worked, but half the letters were perpetually out of order, so evening shows sometimes read like ENIGSHWS. The ticket booth had been replaced by a little counter inside the lobby, and the box office window now just displayed faded film posters from the 90s that no one had bothered to take down. Most people ignored it. There was a huge, shiny multiplex in the mall, 15 minutes away, with reclining seats and 5 flavors of popcorn seasoning. If you wanted a big superhero movie or opening night energy, that's where you went. Starline showed the leftovers. Old films, small releases, quiet dramas that never trended on social media. And I loved it. I started going there regularly during a weird, heavy stretch of my life. I'd just come out of a long relationship. My job felt like an endless loop of circle-back emails, and my brain was stuck in this tired, anxious gear where everything felt both too much and not enough. The theater became my escape hatch. It was cheap, for one thing. On weeknights, they ran a deal where tickets cost less than a takeout burger, and if you flashed a student or work ID, they knocked off another $1. The seats were a little worn, the cup holders sometimes had mysterious sticky patches, and the air conditioning worked only in too strong or not at all. But it felt human in a way the huge multiplex never did. It didn't hurt that it was only a 10-minute walk from my place. I could leave my apartment at 6:45, decide on the sidewalk whether I wanted something light or moody, and be sitting in a dark room by 7, surrounded by strangers and the comforting hum of a projector. That's where I first noticed him. At first, he was just part of the background. When you go to the same place enough times, you start recognizing faces, even if you never talk to them. The couple who always sat in the back row and whispered through the trailers. The tall guy who had to awkwardly fold himself into the seats. The woman with the huge tote bag full of snacks she definitely did not buy at the concession stand. And then there was him. He was always there on Tuesday evenings. Not every single week without fail, but often enough that I started to expect him. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Brown hair, cut short but not freshly. Serious-looking face that softened whenever the lights dimmed. He wore the kind of clothes that made you think of comfortable routines. A dark jacket in winter, a denim one in spring, button-up shirts that weren't new but weren't falling apart either. He always sat in the same seat, screen 2, row G, seat 7. I didn't know it was G7 at first, obviously. I just knew it as that seat, the one on the right side of the theater, not against the wall, but not in the middle either. It wasn't the perfect center spot. It was a little off to the side, a little unassuming. Easy to get to, easy to leave. The first time I really noticed the pattern was a random Tuesday night in early autumn. They were showing some small indie film that had won an award at a festival I'd never heard of. The poster had that moody, washed-out look and a tagline that said something vague about finding yourself in unexpected places. I went mostly because I didn't want to be in my own apartment, listening to the humming silence of my fridge and the neighbor's TV through the wall. The theater was almost empty. There was a couple a few rows in front of me, heads leaning together. An older man in the back, who coughed occasionally, and him, sitting in his usual seat, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the blank screen as if waiting for it to open and swallow him into another world. I'd seen him before, I realized. A few weeks earlier, during a different film, and maybe the week before that. Always the same time, always the same seat. That night, we ended up leaving at the same time, drifting into the lobby with the rest of the tiny audience. He walked a step ahead of me, then slowed briefly near the posters in the lobby, as if checking what would be playing next week. I saw his face in profile, tired, but gentler than it had looked when he came in. He didn't buy anything. He didn't talk to anyone. He just nodded politely when the woman at the ticket counter said, "Good night," and pushed open the glass door to the street. I remember thinking, he looks like he needs this place as much as I do. After that, I couldn't help it. Every Tuesday I went, I'd glance at that seat as soon as I walked in. If he wasn't there yet, I'd catch myself wondering if he'd arrive. If he was, something inside me would relax in a way that didn't quite make sense, like some small part of the universe had lined up properly. I never sat directly next to him. I'm not that bold, and there's something sacred about giving people their little bubbles of solitude in a public place. I usually took a seat 1 or 2 rows back, a little to the left, close enough to see him in my peripheral vision, far enough that I could pretend I wasn't paying attention. I started building theories about him in my head. You do that when you see someone over and over in a specific setting. Maybe he was a critic, I thought once, as he stayed through all the credits of a film that everyone else had bailed on halfway through. But he didn't take notes or check his phone, so that seemed unlikely. Maybe he lived alone, and this was his big weekly outing. Maybe he worked weird hours, and Tuesday was his version of Friday. Maybe he just liked the discounts. There was something about the consistency of it that struck me, though. Most people drifted in and out. They'd show up for the big Oscar hopeful, disappear during the weirder stuff, return for the next buzzy release. He came for the small films, the quiet ones, the ones that didn't have much marketing behind them, and always in that same seat. Once, someone else sat there. It was a busier night than usual, a throwback screening of an old classic that must have meant a lot to somebody, because the theater was half full for the first time in weeks. I'd gotten there a little later than usual, and as I stepped into screen 2, shaking the rain off my jacket, my eyes went immediately to his spot. A teenager was sitting there, hoodie up, feet on the seat in front of him, checking his phone. I froze for a second. Irrationally, it felt like seeing someone park in your unmarked but understood driveway spot. There was no reason to think the seat belonged to the man. It wasn't reserved, no plaque, no name, just another chair in a row of identical upholstery. But I felt weirdly protective of it on his behalf. I found a place for myself and sat down, but I kept glancing at the entrance. At 6:59, right before the pre-show slide that says, "Please silence your phones," he walked in. He paused at the doorway for a second, letting his eyes adjust. Then he made his way down the aisle with the careful walk of someone who doesn't want to kick anyone's legs. His gaze reached the middle section, where his usual spot was. He stopped. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for his face to crumple, or for him to look annoyed, or for him to tap the kid on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, you're in my seat," like in those memes. He did none of that. He just blinked, took a breath, and kept moving. He chose another seat, just 1 row back and 3 places over, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap, as usual. I watched him for a moment before looking away, feeling oddly proud of him for no good reason, as if he'd passed some test I'd invented in my head. The film that night was quieter than I remembered, all long takes and lingering glances. When the credits rolled, people shuffled out more slowly, stretching their legs. I stayed in my seat a bit longer than usual. When I finally stepped into the aisle, he was ahead of me again, waiting patiently for a group in front of him to move. As we got closer to the lobby, we ended up side by side for a brief moment at the exit door. "Good movie," I said before my social anxiety could convince me to stay quiet. He glanced at me, like he wasn't sure I was talking to him. "Yeah," he said. I'd forgotten how much I liked it. His voice matched him. Calm, low, slightly worn, but not unfriendly. "I haven't seen it on a big screen before," I added, filling the silence. "It hits different." There was a tiny pause. Then the corner of his mouth lifted just a bit. "Yeah," he repeated. "It does." We walked out into the night. The conversation as short and self-contained as the little trailers they used to show for the snack bar. But after that, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. We didn't suddenly become best friends or share popcorn. We just started to acknowledge each other. When I came in on Tuesdays, if he was at the ticket counter, we'd nod. If we ended up walking down the hallway at the same time, one of us would say, "Hey." It was the smallest escalation possible, but it made the whole theater feel slightly less like a random public space and more like a recurring scene in our lives. One evening, when the theater was especially empty, I got brave. They were showing a foreign film with subtitles and a melancholic description. I'd gotten there early, and he was already in his usual seat, hands loosely clasped, looking at the blank screen like it might have answers. I stood in the aisle for half a second, heart beating a little too fast for such a small decision. Then I walked over and sat down one seat away from him, leaving the polite buffer of an empty chair between us. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he replied, with that small, quick smile. We sat in silence for a minute. The pre-film ads rolled. A local dentist explained the benefits of electric toothbrushes. A nearby university bragged about its new program. "They've been playing that same dentist ad for 3 months," I said, quietly. "I think I know his kids' birthdays now." He huffed a short laugh. "You get used to it," he said. "When they switch it, it'll feel wrong." "You come here a lot," I said, instantly worrying it sounded accusatory. "Yeah," he said, unfazed. "I guess I do." He didn't ask how I knew. I didn't ask him why. The room dimmed, and the movie started, sweeping us into someone else's life. After that, sitting near him became easier. I didn't do it every time. Some nights I wanted to be alone in the back row. Some nights he sat next to someone else, a woman about his age with the same dark hair and an easy laugh that carried in the small space. On those nights, I stayed further away, letting their little bubble remain intact. I figured they were together, a partner maybe. Sometimes she leaned her head briefly on his shoulder when the lights went down. Sometimes she didn't show up at all. And sometimes he looked like he'd been holding his breath all day and only exhaled when the film started. The first time we really talked was on a Tuesday when the whole world felt like it had a cold. You know those days where the sky is just one big gray smear and the air feels heavy and damp enough to cling to your clothes? That kind of day. Work had been a slow drip of small annoyances, my inbox overflowing with quick questions that were never quick, and I'd spent too much time scrolling past other people's vacations and engagements online. All I wanted was to sit in the dark for 2 hours and forget my own name. When I got to Starline, the lobby was practically empty. The girl at the ticket counter looked like she was halfway through a yawn. "Screen 2?" she asked when I told her what I wanted to see. "Yeah," I said. "Only 3 people in there tonight," she said, glancing at the computer. "You'll have your pick of the seats." I almost smiled. Perfect. Inside screen 2, the air felt cooler than outside. The lights were low, but not yet off. The pre-show trivia questions glowed on the screen, the same ones I'd seen a dozen times. How many Oscars did this movie win? Who directed that? Their answers no longer a mystery. He was there. G7 jacket folded neatly over his lap. He gave me a little nod when he saw me. I sat down in my usual, near but not too near, spot. We watched an ad for a local bakery. another for a cleaning service, then a trailer for a loud action movie that would probably never play in this theater. The screen flipped back to a looping slide that said feature presentation starting soon. He leaned slightly in my direction, just enough that I could hear him when he spoke, but not enough that his voice traveled far. "Long day?" he asked. I must have worn it on my face. "Yeah," I admitted. "Yours?" He nodded once, eyes still on the screen. "Feels like it's been one long day for a while," he said. "That sounds exhausting," I said quietly. He huffed a little. "That's one word for it," he said. We fell silent as the house lights dimmed. During the movie, I kept thinking about that phrase, "one long day." It resonated with me more than I wanted it to. After the credits, when the lights came up, only the three of us, the scattered audience, remained for the end of the scroll. The other person left quickly. I lingered, partly because I liked the score, partly because I wasn't ready to go home. He stood up, stretched his back, and picked up his jacket. When we met at the aisle, he fell into step beside me. "Do you live nearby?" he asked as we headed toward the exit. "Yeah," I said. 10-minute walk. "You?" "About the same," he replied. "Other direction." We passed the poster light boxes in the hallway, their colors a little faded. "That was heavier than I expected," I said, referring to the film we just sat through. "Yeah," he said, but in a careful way, I guess, not just sad for the sake of it. I liked that description. "Careful," I repeated. "That's a good word." He shrugged a little. "My mom used to say some sadness is like rain," he said. "It passes over and everything's greener. Some sadness is like humidity. It just sticks to you." "Which was that?" I asked. "Rain," he said. "Mostly." We stepped out into the damp night, the street glistening with earlier drizzle. "I'm Mark, by the way," he said suddenly. I told him my name. His fit him somehow. Solid, uncomplicated. "I'll see you around," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Tuesday?" He smiled faintly. "Probably." After that, we didn't need the small talk preamble. When we saw each other, we'd say hello. Sometimes we'd share a comment about the film on the way out. I didn't expect the ending. The soundtrack was great. That one scene felt a little too real. We never exchanged phone numbers. We never asked what the other did for a living. It was like we had collectively silently agreed that our knowledge of each other would exist inside the walls of that old theater and nowhere else. And weirdly, that made me feel safer with him than with some people I'd known for years. One Tuesday, I walked in and he wasn't in his seat. My first thought was that I'd misread the time. I checked the clock. 5 minutes until the show. The room was almost empty, save for a handful of people scattered toward the back. I sat down anyway, feeling oddly unsettled, like someone had moved the furniture in my mental living room. The trailer started. The ads played. No Mark. Halfway through a preview for a documentary about bees, I resigned myself to the idea that he wasn't coming this time. People miss things. Life happens. It's not like he had signed a contract. And then, just as the lights dimmed a bit more and the "please silence your phones" slide popped up, the door opened. He slipped in quietly, moving with the apologetic speed of someone who hates being late. He spotted his usual seat, hesitated, maybe not wanting to climb over people, and took an empty one a little further down the row instead. I felt my shoulders unclench in a way that was probably disproportionate to the situation. When the film ended, we found ourselves next to each other in the lobby. "Cutting it close," I said. "Yeah," he said, exhaling. "Work ran late, almost didn't make it." "But you did," I said. He glanced at the screen, listing the upcoming showtimes, then back at me. "Feels weird when I don't," he admitted. "This place marks the week for me now." I knew exactly what he meant. Without the rhythm of those quiet evenings in the theater, the days had a way of blurring into one long smear. "It's like a bookmark," I said. "You can go, 'Oh yeah, that was the week we saw that weird French movie with the snail metaphor.'" He laughed. "Exactly," he said. "I need those bookmarks." There was a little pause. He shifted his jacket from one arm to the other. "My sister thinks it's odd," he said, that I come alone, that I sit in the same spot. She tells me I should use that time to go out and meet people. What, we don't count as people? I asked. Apparently not, he said with a crooked smile. To her, this is just hiding. Do you think it is? I asked. He thought for a moment. Maybe a little, he said, but sometimes hiding is just resting. There it was, again. That feeling of him putting into words something that had been hovering at the edge of my mind. Yeah, I said quietly. I get that. Our conversation stayed in that soft, reflective lane. We never overshared. We never dumped the full contents of our emotional suitcases in front of each other. But here and there, details slipped through. I learned that his parents used to take him to the original Rialto when he was a kid, before the renovation. Back then, the screen was bigger, the seats fewer, and going to a movie was a whole thing. Snacks from home, everyone dressed a little nicer than usual. Mom loved the big epics, he said once, when the theater was showing an old, restored film with sword fights and dramatic music. She'd hum the theme in the kitchen for days afterward. Did you sit in the same seats back then too? I asked. We did actually, he said. She always liked the middle of the row, a few seats from the back. Said it felt like the movie was wrapping its arms around you. That's a nice way to put it, I said. It was a good spot, he said. Still is. I realized then that his current seat wasn't exactly where his mom would have chosen. It was more pragmatic almost, easy to exit if needed. Less in the thick of the crowd. Not that there was much crowd to begin with. At some point, I picked up that he'd moved back to the neighborhood after a long time away. Came back to help out with family stuff, he said vaguely. That was as far as either of us went into that topic. In return, I offered small truths of my own. How I'd started coming to the theater more often after a breakup because my apartment felt too quiet. How I liked films with lots of walking scenes because they made me feel okay about not having everything happen fast. How I sometimes stayed for the credits just because I wasn't ready to stand up and step back into my own life yet. He nodded along like he understood all of that intimately. One evening, the sound cut out halfway through a scene. We were watching a movie where not much happened on the surface, but a lot was simmering underneath. Glances, half-spoken sentences, little shifts in body language. Right when one character was finally about to reveal something important, the dialogue vanished. The picture kept playing, but the sound went dead. No voices, no music, just the faint mechanical whirring of the projector. At first, everyone stayed still, as if they were part of the spell and couldn't move. Then someone in the back muttered, and another person laughed nervously. The lights came up part way. A staff member ducked in, conferred quietly with the person running the projection, and then walked to the front. Hi, everyone, she said, her voice echoing strangely in the room. We're having a small technical issue with the sound. We're working on it now. Feel free to stretch for a couple of minutes. Sorry about that. People stood up, shook their legs, checked their phones. Mark remained seated, hands still laced together, eyes on the frozen scene on the screen. You're not going to move? I asked, leaning toward him. He shrugged. Feels like bad luck, he said lightly. If I get up, they'll fix it, and then I'll have to walk back while everyone's watching. God forbid, I said. The horror, he chuckled. I like this middle space, he said. Not quite in the movie, not quite back in real life. Like being in a paused scene, I said. Exactly, he said. We sat there in the half-light for a moment, watching the still image on the screen. One character mid-sentence, eyes full of something we couldn't yet hear. This theater was almost turned into condos, you know, he said suddenly. I turned my head. Really? A few years ago, he said, before you moved here, I think, the owners were having a hard time making it work. Someone made them an offer. The neighborhood was not happy. I can imagine, I said. This place feels kind of important. He nodded. People put up signs, held meetings, wrote letters. One of those small neighborhood rebellions that never make the news because no one got arrested. What changed their minds? I asked. Someone did the math and realized it had cost more to gut the interior and rebuild than it would to fix what they already had, he said, a little amused. Apparently, the universe decided we needed this weird little relic more than we needed 10 more luxury apartments. I'm glad it did, I said. Me too, he said. The sound flicked back on. The staff member announced, "We're starting again," from a couple of minutes before it cut out, and everyone settled back into their seats. As the story resumed, I kept thinking about how close this place had come to disappearing, how easily it could have been just another "remember that old theater?" in a conversation 10 years from now. I wondered what Mark would have done without it. Summer turned into autumn again. The air outside the theater got sharper. The leaves in the trees lining the street turned brittle and loud underfoot. Inside, the smell of popcorn remained the same, a constant. One Tuesday, when the weather forecast promised a storm but only delivered drizzle, I walked into screen 2 and found Mark not in his usual seat. He was in the very back row, in the corner, staring at his hands. I hesitated, then changed direction and walked up the stairs to where he was. "Hey," I said, sliding into the row a few seats away. "Avoiding the front lines?" He looked up, startled, then relaxed when he recognized me. "Hey," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "Just needed a little extra distance today." "You okay?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shrugged. "My mom passed away last month," he said very simply. I felt like the air thinned for a second. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt inadequate and necessary at the same time. "Yeah," he said softly. "We knew it was coming, but knowing doesn't make it not hurt," I said. "Yeah," he repeated. I thought back to his earlier comments about going to the movies with his parents at the old Rialto, about how his mom liked grand epics. Did she like this theater?" I asked. He nodded. "She loved it," he said. "We came to the reopening together, when they split it into 3 screens. She complained about the smaller screen, of course, but secretly she was just glad it was still here." "That's a good complaint to have," I said. "Yeah," he said. "She was planning on coming to more of these throwback screenings with me this year." Then, things got worse faster than we thought. We sat there in the dim room, surrounded by empty seats. "I almost stopped coming," he admitted. "Felt wrong somehow, like I'd be doing it without her, even though I've been doing it without her for years in reality." "But you're here," I said. "I'm here," he agreed. The screen flickered to life with the pre-show slides. He traced a pattern on his knee with one finger. "It's weird," he said quietly. "Being in a place that reminds you of someone you've lost. It hurts, but it also feels like being closer to them, like the air is full of their echo." "That makes sense," I said. "This feels like a place where she existed with you." He looked at me then, and his eyes were shinier than the reflection on the screen. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly." We didn't say much else. The movie started, some gentle, slow story about family and time, which felt both appropriate and risky. I glanced over a couple of times and saw him watching intently, jaw tight, eyes fixed. He stayed through all the credits. When the lights came up, he sat for a few more seconds, like he was adjusting to the idea of standing. "Thanks for sitting back here," he said, as we made our way to the exit. "Any time," I said. "You can change seats, It's not a legally binding contract." He smiled faintly. "Don't tell that to G7, he said. "It might get jealous." After that, I noticed he started switching seats more often. Sometimes he went back to his usual spot. Sometimes he sat further back or closer to the aisle. Once, he took a front row seat and stretched his legs out, laughing afterward about how overwhelmingly big everyone's pores looked. It was as if, after losing his mother, he'd decided he didn't have to cling to the exact same place anymore. The theater itself was the ritual now, not the specific patch of worn upholstery. One night, near the end of that year, I arrived early and found the theater completely empty. No Mark, no other regulars, just rows of quiet seats and the soft hum of ventilation. I took G7. It felt like borrowing someone's coat while they weren't using it. I sat there, waiting, feeling the slight give of the cushion beneath me, The angle of the armrests, the way the screen lined up in front. I tried to imagine what it had been like for him, night after night, walking in and settling here while the rest of his life wobbled around him. A few minutes later, I heard the door open. Reflexively, I turned my head. He walked in, shaking off his umbrella, glancing around the room as his eyes adjusted. His gaze landed on me, in his seat. For a split second, I regretted everything. Maybe it was too familiar. Maybe I'd misread the level of our connection. Maybe he'd feel displaced. Then he smiled. "Ah," he said, making his way down the row. "G7 has a new tenant." "Short-term lease," I said quickly. "I'll leave it in good condition." He chuckled and sat down in the seat next to me. "View's pretty good from there," he said. "Yeah, I can see why you picked it," I replied. He leaned back, stretching his legs slightly. "I think you're the only person I'd trust with it," he said lightly. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the heating in the room. "You can always evict me if needed," I said. "Nah," he said. "Feels like a co-op now." We watched the movie side by side. At one point, there was a funny line, and we laughed at the same time. During a quiet scene, our breaths fell into the same slow rhythm. When the film ended, we sat for a bit before standing, neither of us in a rush. In the lobby, as we put on our coats, he said, "I might not be around as often soon." I looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I think so. I got a job offer. Somewhere a bit farther out. Not too far, but far enough that I won't be able to walk here on Tuesdays out of habit." "Oh," I said. "That's good, right?" "I think so," he said. "It's more stable, better hours. I won't have to juggle things as much. My sister is closer too. It feels like a next step." "But you'll miss this place," and said. "Yeah," he said. "A lot." We stood in the echoey lobby, surrounded by old posters and the faint smell of popcorn oil. "I have this ridiculous worry," he admitted, "that if I stop coming here, I'll lose all the versions of myself that sat in that seat. Like they'll fade." I thought about all the nights I'd trudged into this theater, feeling like a frayed rope, and walked out feeling slightly more whole. About the barely there nods that turned into actual sentences. About watching him navigate grief and routine and small joys in the glow of the screen. "I don't think they'll fade," I said. "They're kind of stored here and in you. The chair is just furniture." He smiled at that, really smiled. "You're good at this," he said. "At what?" I asked. "At making things sound less scary," he said. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You're the one who taught me that hiding can be resting." He laughed softly. "Touché." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, searching for the right way to end the moment. "I'll still visit sometimes," he said. "Maybe not every Tuesday, but, once in a while. And if I see someone sitting in G7, I'll know they're in good company." "And if there's a different guy there every week," I asked. "Then I'll know the theater's doing its job," he said. We walked out together. At the door, we turned in opposite directions. "Hey, Mark," I said. He looked back. "Thanks," I said, "for sharing the room." He nodded, eyes a little bright. "Thank you," he said, "for noticing I existed in it." We went our separate ways, our footsteps fading into the sounds of the street. He did come back now and then. Not every week. Some months passed without a glimpse, but every so often, I'd walk into Starline on a random weekday, and there he'd be. Maybe not in G7, but somewhere in the room. Hands folded, eyes on the screen. Sometimes we'd sit together. Sometimes we'd just share a nod in the hallway. The theater was still our shared space, even if our lives were unfolding mostly out of sight of each other. Eventually, my visits became less frequent too. Work changed. I moved. I started going to a different cinema across town that played weirder films. But Starline remained. Its flickering marquee, a familiar anchor whenever I passed by, every time I walked past and saw the now showing. Bored out front, I pictured the rows inside and the people scattered among them. Someone in the back row hiding from their own day. a couple on a first date trying to gauge each other's reactions, an older woman watching the same classic she'd seen 30 years ago. Maybe Mark, maybe someone like him, someone in a favorite seat, in a half-empty theater, letting the lights dim and the world go quiet for a while. I think about him whenever I book a ticket now, in any theater. I always pick nearly the same spot, middle-ish, not too close, not too far. Sometimes I break the habit and sit somewhere else, just because I can. And sometimes, when the trailers are rolling and the room is full of that familiar pre-movie hush, I glance at the seat next to me and imagine someone sitting there, week after week, finding a little bit of rest in the repetition. People like to say the magic of movies is in the stories on the screen, but I think it's also in the people who show up to watch them. The quiet regulars, the ones who sit in the same spot because life is unpredictable enough everywhere else. The ones who turn an old, half-empty theater into a kind of living room they share with strangers. Mark was one of those people. So was I, in my own way. And maybe you are too, if you've ever sat in the same seat, in the same dim room, and felt your shoulders drop as the screen lit up, just a little, right before the story began. Our fourth story is about a quiet, older woman who fed a stray cat behind an apartment building every evening, and what happened after she suddenly stopped coming. Make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I used to think the alley behind my apartment building belonged to nobody. It was one of those narrow side spaces you get in older parts of the city, barely wide enough for a small car, paved with cracked asphalt and half-hearted patches, flanked on one side by the back wall of our building and on the other by a tall wooden fence. The fence leaned just enough to make you slightly nervous on windy days, and at the far end there was a dented metal gate that technically locked, but only if you kicked it in a particular way. Mostly, it was just where the dumpsters lived. If you walked through it during the day, you'd see the usual urban clutter, recycling bins lined up like sheeted plastic soldiers, a few abandoned crates, the ghost outlines of old graffiti someone had painted over in the wrong shade of beige. Sometimes there would be a broken chair or an orphaned mattress leaning against the wall for a few days until the city finally took it away. At night, it felt like another world. The lights from the parking lot barely reached, leaving most of the alley in this quiet, bluish shadow. The city noise softened back there, the traffic more distant, the voices more muffled. It smelled faintly like damp concrete, old leaves, and the familiar mix of city air and someone's cooking from an open kitchen window. The first few months after I moved in, I barely noticed it. I was too busy learning the bus routes, figuring out the grocery store layout, and unpacking boxes, slowly enough that it started to feel like a personality flaw. My life mostly existed in two places: my small apartment on the third floor and my job across town. The alley was just something I walked past to take out the trash. Then, one early autumn evening, I opened the back door of the building with a bag of garbage in my hand and saw the cat. At first, I thought it was a shadow, just a darker patch in the already dim space. But then it moved, smooth, low, deliberate, and two eyes caught the light from the stairwell behind me, flashing briefly. It was sitting near the recycling bins, tail curled around its paws, watching me. I froze like I was the intruder. "Hey," I said stupidly after a second. "Didn't mean to crash your whatever this is." The cat flicked an ear, unimpressed. It was mostly white, with patches of gray and brown along its back and tail. One ear had a small notch near the top, like it had gotten into a fight at some point. It wasn't skinny exactly, but it wasn't fluffy either. Just lean, alert. A city cat. I'd never had pets growing up, and my relationship with animals was mostly limited to, "You're cute from over there." I didn't move closer. I just walked to the dumpster, lifted the lid, threw in the bag, and let it slam shut. The sound echoed down the alley. The cat flinched, then held still watching. "You okay?" I asked, like an idiot talking to a stranger at a bus stop. It blinked slowly. Then it turned its head away as if to say, "I'm fine." You're loud. I went back inside, thinking that was the end of it. The next evening, I saw her. I don't know how I'd missed her before. She was standing near the fence, a small plastic container in her hand, the kind you'd get from deli soup or takeout. The cat was there too, a few feet away, tail flicking, clearly interested. The woman looked to be in her 70s. She was wearing a faded purple coat that had seen better days, and a knitted hat pulled down over gray hair. Her shoes were sensible and worn. There was something careful about the way she stood, as if she'd learned to move gently through a world that didn't always accommodate her speed. She unsnapped the lid of the container and scattered something on the ground. Dry food, I realized as I got closer. Little brown pellets that clicked softly when they hit the pavement. The cat approached cautiously, then lowered its head and started eating. The woman watched, hands tucked into her coat sleeves. I slowed my steps, suddenly uncertain of my role in this scene. I'd just come down to throw away another bag of trash, maybe scroll my phone for a second before going back up. Now I felt like I was walking into a private moment. She noticed me when I was still a few steps away. Her eyes flicked up, sharp and assessing in a way that reminded me of the cat. "Oh," she said in a voice that carried a soft accent I couldn't quite place. "Sorry, I am not in your way." No, I said quickly. "You're fine. I'm just taking this out." I lifted the trash bag as proof. She nodded and stepped slightly to the side, though she wasn't blocking the path to begin with. The cat glanced up at me, then went back to its food like it had made a cost-benefit analysis and decided I wasn't a threat as long as the old woman was there. I threw the trash away, trying not to slam the lid this time. When I turned back, the woman was still watching the cat with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You feed it?" I asked, as if that wasn't obvious. "Yes," she said simply. "He waits for me now." "He?" I repeated, glancing at the cat with new curiosity. "How do you know it's a he?" She gave a small, amused shrug. "I don't know," she admitted. "Feels like a he." Something about that made me smile. "He looks like he trusts you," I said. She hummed. "He trusts food," she said. "I am attached to food in his mind. It's okay, it is enough." The cat flicked its tail in agreement, crunching industriously. "I live in the building," I said, gesturing vaguely upward, because apparently I'd decided this was important context. "Yes," she said. "I see you, 3rd floor." My eyes widened a little. "You do?" She shrugged again as if to say, "Of course." "You work late," she added. "You carry big bags sometimes. Or computer." I had the sudden, slightly disorienting realization that while I'd been going about my days, convinced I was largely invisible to my neighbors, someone had been quietly noticing my comings and goings. "Oh, I said. "Yeah, that's me." She didn't push for more details. She just nodded once, then looked back at the cat. He had finished most of the food and was now licking the ground, searching for stray crumbs. The woman snapped the lid back onto the container and tucked it under her arm. "Good night," she said, with a little nod in my direction. "Good night," I echoed. I went back inside, feeling oddly grounded, like I'd found a small thread of connection to the building without quite meaning to. After that, I saw her often. If I came down to the alley around dusk, especially on days when the air held that particular coolness that meant summer was really gone, I'd find her already there. Same coat, same container, same cat waiting near the fence, at a polite distance, until the food hit the ground. Once I saw her talking softly to him in another language, the words flowing gentle and low as she poured out the food. "Do you know his name?" I asked once, partly teasing, partly curious. She looked up at me. "He doesn't tell me," she said, "so I call him Mr. K." "Mr. K," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Like, oh." She frowned slightly, searching for the English word. "Short of caught." She patted her chest with one hand. "In my language, cat is caught. So, Mr. K." "Mr. K," I said, testing it out. The cat flicked an ear, unimpressed by the name discussion. "It sounds very official," I added. "He is official cat of this alley." she said. He keeps everyone in order. I guess that makes sense, I said, glancing at the dumpsters and the crooked fence. It needs some management. She gave a small, quick smile that transformed her face for a moment. I never asked exactly where she was from. The accent was there, but soft, blurred by years of living in a place where nobody else spoke like that. Later, I'd learned pieces, enough to guess, roughly, but at the time, she existed to me as the quiet older woman who feeds the alley cat. Her name I found out later, too. After several weeks of awkwardly avoiding the fact that we were talking regularly without knowing each other's names, she introduced herself one night without any ceremony. I am Elena, she said, as she poured food into a neat little pile on the pavement. Elena, I repeated. Yes, she said, saying my name before I could. Third floor. A tiny wry smile. You think no one knows, but walls have eyes. Have you been spying on me, Elena? I asked, amused. Not spying, she said. Observing. Spying is for bad reasons. Observing is for understanding. And what have you understood about me? I asked, half joking, half nervous. She considered this for a second, then shrugged. You are tired, she said, but not in a bad way. Just full in the head. That was uncomfortably accurate. Yeah, I said. That sounds about right. She clicked her tongue softly at Mr. K, who had finished eating and now rolled onto his back, showing his belly, but clearly not inviting anyone to touch it. Sometimes feeding someone else is best cure for too much head, she added, almost as an afterthought. I didn't have a good response to that, so I just watched the cat for a moment, feeling strangely seen. Our conversations were never long. She was not a talkative person in the way some older people can be, the ones who launch into detailed stories about every topic. But when she spoke, it felt like she'd thought her words through. Sometimes we'd talk about the weather, the universal fallback topic when you want to say, I see you, without saying too much. Sometimes she'd mention the bus being late, or the price of bread, or how noisy the upstairs neighbor on the second floor was. Once she told me, entirely unprompted, American dryers are too strong. They want to cook the clothes, not dry them. I had no choice but to agree. As the weeks went on, I started to notice how precise her little routine was. She always came around the same time, just as the sun had dipped, low enough that the alley was mostly in shadow, but before it was fully dark. She always carried the food in the same container, tucked under her arm like something important. She always poured the food in nearly the same spot, near a crack in the asphalt, with a small tuft of grass growing stubbornly through it. Mr. K, for his part, started associating me with food-adjacent presence, which I took as a kind of promotion. The first few times he saw me, he'd freeze and watch, ready to bolt if I made any sudden moves. Eventually, he graduated to glancing up and then resuming his meal. Once, on a particularly cold evening, he walked right past my feet without flinching, like I was just more alley. I considered that a major win. One evening, after a long day at work that felt like 50 meetings stacked together, I came down with a bag of trash, expecting to see them in their usual spots. The alley was empty, the dumpsters sat where they always did. The fence leaned. A damp paper cup rolled lazily in the breeze. No Elena, no Mr. K. I waited a moment, suddenly uncertain. There was no reason to think they would always be there. People have lives, cats have territories. But the absence felt louder than the presence ever had. I told myself it was silly to feel disappointed. I threw the trash away and went back upstairs. The next day they were there again. She looked the same. He looked the same. The routine clicked back into place. If there was one thing that the last few years had taught me, it was that change usually happened loudly in my life. Moving cities, starting new jobs, the big stuff. And consistency was harder to notice until it was gone. Elena and the cat became a small, steady point in my week that I didn't realize I was relying on. As winter crept in, the air in the alley got sharper, the coats got heavier. My breath puffed out in little clouds. The ground occasionally frosted over in thin, slippery patches in the early mornings. I started worrying about the cat more. "He's okay?" I asked one particularly cold evening as I hugged my arms around myself for warmth. "He is smarter than people," Elena said. "He finds warm when warm exists." "Where does he go?" I asked. She tilted her head toward the fence. "Other side," she said. "There is small space under deck, and I think he has friends." She twitched her nose in a way that suggested raccoons or other night creatures. "You can tell all that?" I asked. "I watch," she said simply. "You watch a lot," I said. "When you live alone, watching keeps you from disappearing," she replied. It was such a quietly devastating sentence that I didn't know what to do with it in the moment. "Do you ever think about bringing him inside?" I asked after a beat. It seemed like the obvious question. She shook her head. "He is not inside," she said. "He does not want walls. He wants choice. I respect this." "Even if it's cold?" I pressed, the soft-hearted part of me, imagining him out there in the snow. "Even if it is cold," she said. "He knows where to hide. And she tapped the container. "I am compromise. A little help, not a cage." I thought about that for a while after I went back upstairs, about the difference between saving something and changing it into something it never asked to be. The first snow came in December, though it was more of a wet mess than a picturesque blanket. The alley turned into a patchwork of slush and dirty ice. I started wearing thicker gloves to carry out the trash, because the metal lid of the dumpster burned my fingers with cold. One night, as I stood there in my ridiculous puffy coat, I watched Elena walk carefully across the slick pavement, her boots making small, confident steps. She looked like she'd done this her whole life. "Not scared of falling?" I asked, a little guilty at how cautious I felt compared to her. "I am scared," she said. "But scared does not mean you stop walking. You just walk differently." She sprinkled the food in a dryer patch near the wall. Mr. K maneuvered his way there with the determined grace of a cat who had learned the hard way not to trust ice. She glanced at me, then at my thin gloves, then at my face. "You need better coat," she observed. "This is my better coat," I protested. "It bushy is city coat, not winter coat," she said. "Winter coat is ugly and warm. This one is cute and cold." I couldn't argue with that. "You're very direct," I said. "When you get old, polite is too expensive," she replied. "You pay with time. I don't have so much time." Her words lodged in my chest in a way I didn't fully understand until later. She didn't mean it in a dramatic way, just factual, like she was listing the contents of her pantry. After that, I bought a thicker coat. I didn't tell her it was because of what she said, but the first time she saw me wearing it, she nodded approvingly. "Better," she said. "Practical," I said. "Practical as love," she replied. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being just the young person from the third floor and the older woman who feeds the cat to each other and became something quieter. Not friends exactly, not in the let's meet for coffee and trade life stories way, but consistent presences in each other's days. Sometimes we wouldn't talk at all. I'd step into the alley and find her already there, leaning against the wall slightly, watching Mr. K eat. I'd nod, she'd nod. The three of us would share the moment like co-owners of a small, hidden world behind the building. Other times, she'd ask simple questions. "You work today or day off? How is your mother? You call her? Why you look so sad in the eyes when you come home?" She didn't say it accusingly, just noticing. I never had a good answer for that last one. One evening, close to the holidays, I came home later than usual, the sky already fully dark. I was exhausted in the way that made my bones feel heavy. As I trudged up the stairs, I passed Elena in the hallway, bundled in her purple coat, the container under her arm. "You just come?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Long day." She studied my face for a second, then tilted her head toward the back door. "Come," she said. "We feed the king." I could have said no. I could have said I was too tired or had things to do. Instead, I found myself turning around and following her down the stairs, out into the cold alley. The air bit at my cheeks. The sky, above the narrow strip of open space, was a deep navy, one star barely visible between the buildings. Mr. K appeared as soon as the door opened, as if he'd been listening for that particular sound. "See?" she said softly. "He waits. He pretends he does not, but he waits." She poured out the food. The sound of the pellets hitting the ground was oddly soothing. We stood there for a few minutes, the three of us in companionable silence. I felt my shoulders drop in a way they hadn't all day. "Better than television," she murmured. "Yeah," I said. "It is." January came with real snow this time, thick flakes that stuck to the trees and turned the alley into a monochrome photograph. The sun. Dumpsters wore soft white caps. Footprints stood out sharply for a while before filling in. I worried about Elena more than I worried about the cat now. She had to walk from the bus stop, and the sidewalks were a mess for days at a time. I pictured her navigating the ice with her careful steps, hands full of groceries, stubbornly refusing to walk slower just because the world decided to be slippery. "You shouldn't be out in this," I told her one especially bad evening, when the temperature had dropped enough that even my new coat felt inadequate. "And you should," she countered. "I'm younger," I said. "You are still breakable," she said. Age does not make ice softer. Despite the conditions, she didn't miss many nights. If she did, I didn't see it. The cat still appeared, well fed enough to suggest someone was taking care of him. Once, when the snow was piled high and the alley felt like a narrow tunnel, I asked, "What happens when you go away?" "He gets used to this." "I don't go away," she said simply. "This is my away." "Ever?" I asked. She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe one day, but not yet. He has, how you say, priority." "Over vacations?" I asked, half teasing. "Vacations are for people who have too much of same thing," she said. "I have many different days. No need to escape." It wasn't until much later that I realized how much of her world seemed to revolve around this building, this alley, this small orbit. Then, one night, she wasn't there. It was late February, the kind of cold that sneaks under your clothes and settles in your joints, even if you knock your boots against the door frame before stepping out. I went down with my trash bag, already pulling my coat tighter against the wind. As I pushed open the door, I looked automatically toward the familiar spot near the fence. Empty. No purple coat, no plastic container, no small figure watching a white and gray cat. Mr. K was there. He sat where he usually did, near the crack in the asphalt with the little tuft of grass, except now it was just a small bump under the snow. He looked at me as soon as I stepped out, eyes bright, ears forward. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "You're on your own tonight?" He flicked his tail, then walked toward me with a kind of tentative hopefulness I hadn't seen before. I walked to the dumpster, threw the bag away, and stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, heart doing this odd little wobble. What was I supposed to do? Logically, it didn't have to mean anything. People get sick. People visit relatives. People sometimes just don't feel like going outside in the cold. But there was a different quality to the empty space in the alley that night. A silence where something should have been. The cat circled my legs once, then sat down a few feet away, looking at the back door as if expecting it to open any second. I didn't have cat food. I didn't even have any leftovers that seemed reasonable to offer. Nothing in my pockets but a crumpled receipt and a pair of gloves. "I wasn't told I'd be on duty tonight," I murmured. The cat didn't argue. He just waited. "I'll try to get you something tomorrow," I said, feeling ridiculous for talking to him like he could understand. Back upstairs, I found myself opening my pantry and staring at the shelves as if something might appear that said appropriate emergency food for newly promoted stray. None of it did. I made a mental note to buy some cat food the next day and went to bed feeling vaguely uneasy. The next day I came home a little earlier than usual, a small bag of dry cat food clinking softly against the inside of my backpack. I hadn't told myself explicitly that this was for him, but that's exactly what it was. I went out to the alley. He was there, of course. Mr. K always seemed to be there, in that twilight zone between day and night, as if he belonged to that time of day. Someone had already fed him. The faint remnants of food were scattered near the wall, different from the brand I'd seen before, but unmistakably cat kibble. He looked up at me from mid-lick and then, surprisingly, came closer, rubbing his side against the fence before sitting a little nearer than usual. "Okay," I said. "So it's not my turn yet." There was still no sign of Elena. I told myself again that it was fine. She was old, not made of steel. Maybe she'd decided to skip a couple of nights. Maybe someone else had taken over for her. 2 days later, she still hadn't appeared. Other small differences started to stand out. No purple coat in the hallway when I came home. No soft sound of her door opening when the mail slot clacked. On the third day, I saw the building manager knocking on her door, a frown on his face. He had a clipboard in his hand, the sign of official building business. I slowed on the stairs, suddenly feeling like I was intruding on something serious. "Everything okay?" I asked, before my brain could tell me to stay out of it. He turned, startled, then recognized me. "Oh yeah, I think so," he said. "Her rent check was late. She's never late. Just making sure it didn't get lost or something." "Is she home?" I asked. He knocked again. No answer. He sighed. "She's probably at her daughter's," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. "I'll try again later." That evening, the alley felt wrong. The cat was there, as usual. Someone had fed him again. Or maybe he'd found something on his own. But the space where she usually stood, near the fence, close enough to reach the cat if he needed it, far enough to give him his illusions of independence, remained empty. I opened the bag of food I'd bought and poured a small handful onto the ground, near his usual spot anyway. He sniffed it, then started eating with the same practical acceptance he'd shown Elena's offerings. I watched him, feeling like I'd been handed a job I hadn't applied for. "Guess I'm the temp," I said quietly. He crunched, unbothered. Days passed. I started going to the alley on purpose now, not just when I had trash. Each time the cat was there. Each time Elena wasn't. I made sure he had something to eat, but it felt like filling in a blank someone else had left on a form. The food was part of it, but not the whole picture. What if she's okay? I asked myself. What if she just moved or went somewhere warm for the winter? What if she's not? Another quiet voice added. I didn't have a way to answer. One afternoon, as I was checking my mailbox, I saw the building manager again. "Hey," I said, "do you know anything about Elena in 1B? Is she all right?" He paused mid-shuffle of envelopes. "1B?" he repeated. "Oh yeah, didn't someone tell you? Her daughter came by last week. She had a fall. They took her to a rehab facility, I think. They're figuring out next steps." The way he said next steps made my stomach twist. "Is she going to come back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He hesitated. "Hard to say," he said. "Her daughter hinted that she might stay with family from now on. They're worried about her being alone." He didn't sound cruel about it, just matter of fact. But something in me recoiled anyway. "She didn't say goodbye," I heard myself saying, which was a strange thing to admit about someone who technically wasn't a relative or even a close friend. He gave me a sympathetic look. "It all happened pretty fast, from what I understand," he said. "Her daughter had a lot to handle. Hospitals, paperwork, all that. I thought about Elena's words. I don't have so much time." "Do you know where she is?" I asked. It felt intrusive, but I couldn't help it. He rattled off the name of a place across town. A facility I'd passed on the bus a couple of times. A brick building with a small courtyard and a sign that always made my heart sink a little, though I'd never had reason to go in. I thanked him, even though I didn't know what to do with the information. That evening, when I stepped into the alley with a small container of food in my hand, the air felt heavier. I poured the food out in the same spot she used to, near the crack in the asphalt. Mr. K appeared from under the fence like a shadow, walked up and started eating. I watched him, and this time, I said her name out loud. "Elena," I murmured. "You're late." He didn't react, obviously, but there was something comforting about putting her name into the air, as if it might find its way to wherever she was now. I started talking to the cat more after that. Not full conversations, not outpourings of my soul, just small comments like the ones I used to exchange with her. "It's cold tonight. The bus was late again. You would hate how much they raised the price of bread." Sometimes I caught myself using her phrasing. Priorities, too much head, ugly and warm. One particularly quiet night, I hopped up to sit on the low concrete ledge under the building's back window, my feet dangling, watching Mr. K eat. "You know," I said, "you're not just eating for you anymore. You're kind of proof of something." He flicked his tail, possibly offended, possibly indifferent. Proof that she was here, I meant. Proof that she didn't just disappear. That her routine left marks. The weeks stretched on. Winter turned slowly toward a wet, gray spring. The snow in the alley melted into dirty puddles. The little tuft of grass in the crack reappeared, a tiny green flag. I settled into a new version of the ritual without meaning to. Come home from work, put down my bag, change shoes, grab the container of food I now kept under the sink, step into the shadowed alley, watch the cat emerge from under the fence or from behind the bins, pour food, stand nearby while he ate, making sure the raccoons or bolder pigeons didn't rush him. It was never long. 5 minutes, maybe 10, depending on how tired everyone seemed. Me, him, the alley itself. Sometimes other tenants would pass through, glancing at us with the detached curiosity of people catching the middle of a story they hadn't been following. "You feed him?" one guy from the second floor asked once, nodding at the cat. "Yeah," I said. "Someone else used to, but they're not here right now." He squinted. "The old lady?" he asked. "The one in the purple coat?" "Yeah," I said. "Elena." He nodded slowly. "She was nice," he said. "Always held the door for my kids." I hadn't known that. It made my throat tighten a little. Over the months, I learned small facts about her from other people. The woman in 2C mentioned that Elena had once helped her carry groceries up the stairs when the elevator was broken. The man in 1D said she'd lent him a screwdriver when his shelf was wobbling. Someone said they used to see her sitting at the bus stop with a book, even on cold days. It struck me how many tiny ways she'd been part of the building's ecosystem. Like a quiet, stabilizing force I hadn't really appreciated until she was gone. I thought about visiting her. The name of the facility lived in the back of my mind, just as persistent as the rhythm of the alley routine. Some days, as I sat on the bus and we passed near that area, I'd catch a glimpse of the brick building and feel this tug, an invisible thread connecting it to my small life. What would I even say, though? "Hi, I'm the person from the third floor who took out trash at the same time as you and gradually became someone you talked to about coats and cats." Maybe that would be enough. I didn't go. Not at first. I let work and inertia and the fear of intruding talk me out of it. Instead, I kept feeding her cat. I knew rationally that he wasn't hers, not in any legal or official sense. But the connection between them had been real enough that it felt disrespectful, somehow, to think of him as just a stray now. Once, as I watched him eat, I said, "You know, you are more domesticated than you pretend." He flicked one ear and kept chewing. "Don't worry," I added. "Your secret's safe with me." On the first really warm evening of spring, when the air finally lost that late winter bite, I went out to the alley and saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The door to 1B was open. Not all the way, just a little. Enough that I could see the edge of a cardboard box and the corner of a picture frame leaning against the wall. The building manager was there, along with a younger woman who had Elena's eyes and hair, but less gray. They were sorting through things, speaking in low voices. "Are you sure?" I heard him ask. "It's what she wanted," the younger woman said. "She can't do the stairs anymore, and she's closer to us now. It's just time. There was a finality to the way she said, "Mom," that made my chest ache. I almost kept walking. It wasn't my place. Then she turned and saw me. "Oh," she said. "Hi, do you live here?" "Yeah," I said, suddenly aware of how awkward I must look, standing there, clutching a container of cat food. "Third floor, right?" she asked. Elena's always mentioned the young one upstairs who works late. Heat rushed to my face. She talked about me? "Of course," she said, smiling softly. "She likes to watch people's patterns. She said you were conscientious." I laughed once, a little unsteadily. "That's nicer than I deserve." The woman looked at the container in my hands, then toward the back door. "Is that for the cat?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Mr. K, Elena used to feed him. I've been filling in." Something in her expression shifted. Some mix of recognition and something warmer. "She told me," the woman said. She said, "Yeah, if I disappear, someone will feed him. I don't know who, but someone will." I swallowed. She had a lot of faith in us. "She said this building had more good people than it realized," the woman replied. I guess she was right. There was a pause. "Can I ask?" I started, then hesitated. "Is she okay?" The woman's smile dimmed but didn't disappear. "She's as okay as she can be," she said. "Her body is less kind than her mind, but she still reads, still watches the birds from her window, still complains about American dryers." I let out a small laugh of surprise. She told me the same thing. "She has strong opinions," the woman said fondly. "Is she coming back?" I blurted. The woman took a breath. "No," she said gently. "The stairs are too much. She falls more. We're afraid. Next time we won't get there in time." I nodded, staring at a worn patch of carpet near the door. "I'm sorry," I said, aware of how inadequate that sounded. "Don't be," the woman said. "She's had a long life. She's just in the quieter part of it now." There was another pause. I shifted the container in my hands, suddenly self-conscious. "Would it be weird if I visited her?" I asked. "At the facility. I know we're not family or anything." The woman's eyes softened. "It wouldn't be weird," she said. "I think she'd like that. She misses this place, the routine, the people she watched." "Could you?" I started, then stopped, feeling like I was asking too much. "I'll write down her room number," the woman said, as if she'd already anticipated my question. She disappeared briefly into the apartment and came back with a small piece of paper, her handwriting neat and precise. "Here," she said. "Don't feel obligated. She understands people have lives. But if you go, it will mean something to her." I took the paper like it was something fragile. "Thank you," I said. "And thank you for feeding the cat," she added. "She worries about him more than she worries about herself." "He's fine," I said quickly. "Bossy, actually." "That sounds right," she said, smiling. We said our goodbyes. She went back to sorting through her mother's apartment, deciding which pieces of a life could fit into a smaller space. I went to the alley. Mr. K was already there, of course. He always was. As he ate, I thought about the facility across town with its brick walls and small courtyard. About Elena sitting by a window, watching people's patterns from a new vantage point. About how some routines end and others change, and some continue in different forms. "Maybe I'll tell her you're doing okay," I said to the cat. He licked his paw, indifferent. A week later, I went. I almost talked myself out of it several times on the bus. It felt strange, too intimate, and too distant at the same time. What if she didn't remember me? What if she thought it was inappropriate? What if I got there, froze, and just stood awkwardly by her bed like an underdressed extra in someone else's family drama? The facility lobby was bright and smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sweet, like canned fruit. A television murmured in the corner, playing a nature documentary. A receptionist sat behind a desk with a stack of clipboards. Hi, I said, giving my name and showing the small paper with Elena's details. I used to be her neighbor. The receptionist smiled in a professional, practiced way, then pointed me toward a hallway. Her room was at the end, by a window that overlooked the small courtyard. I could see the back of her head before I reached the door. Gray hair thinner than I remembered, shoulders a little more hunched. I knocked lightly on the door frame. Come, come, she said without turning around. I am not important enough to knock for so long. I stepped inside. She turned. For a moment, her eyes squinted, like she was trying to place me. Then they brightened. Ah, she said. Third floor. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Yeah, I said. It's me. She looked smaller in the bed than she had in the alley. The room around her was tidy but impersonal. A framed photo on the table, a vase with fake flowers, a stack of library books on the chair. You cut your hair, she observed. You remember how it was? I asked, surprised. I observe, she said, as if we hadn't moved at all from our old conversation. We talked, not for hours, not in some dramatic, life-unfolding monologue. Just like we used to, standing in the shadow of the building, except now the walls were white and the light was softer. I told her about the building, the time the elevator broke and everyone had to use the stairs, the new couple in 2A with the loud music, the neighbor whose dog had finally learned not to bark at every single door slam, and the cat. He is still there, she asked, leaning forward slightly. Every evening, I said. He waits by the fence. I bring him food. She closed her eyes for a second, an expression of relief softening her face. I knew someone would, she said. I did not know who. I was curious. It's me, apparently, I said. Good choice, she said. You have soft steps. I'd never thought about my steps one way or another in my life, but coming from her, it felt like a compliment. You miss him? I asked. Yes, she said simply. But I miss the alley too, and the cold, and the ugly boots. It is not just about Cat. It is about being there. She looked out the window toward the small courtyard. Here, my world is. She gestured with her hand, drawing a small circle in the air. There, it was bigger, even if I did not go far. I'm sorry they moved you, I said, though I knew it wasn't that simple. She shook her head. My bones moved me, she said. My children just followed. We fell into a comfortable silence for a moment. Do you like it here? I asked. She pursed her lips. Like is too strong a word, she said. It is safe. Safe is different from like. I thought about that. Do they feed you well at least? I tried. She made a face. They try, she said diplomatically. I miss my own soup. I could try to smuggle some in, I offered. She laughed, a genuine sound that made her seem, for a second, like the woman I'd seen steady on the ice. Your soup? She teased. Okay, maybe not mine, I said, but I can ask your daughter for the recipe. She shook her head, amused. We talked a little more. About small things, the bus routes, the weather, the way the staff here wore shoes that squeaked in the hallway. Then as I got up to leave, she said, You keep feeding him, yes? Yes, I said, every day. It isn't just food, she said. I know, I said. She studied my face for a moment, like she was searching for something. You will have times in your life when you need something to do with your hands while your heart is hurting, she said, matter of fact. Feeding someone else is good for this. Animal, person, plant. It does not matter. I felt something twist in my chest. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? She asked. For the job? I said, gesturing vaguely. Because job of feeding your cat and accidentally learning about kindness was too long for the moment. She smiled. You were going to do it anyway, she said. I just gave you excuse. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. On the bus ride home, watching the city slide by through the streaked window, I thought about how many small inheritances we pass between each other without contracts or signatures. Not money, not property, habits, rituals, ways of taking care of small things in a big, indifferent world. By the time I reached my stop, the sky was edging toward that soft blue that happens before dusk. I went straight to the alley. Mr. K appeared almost immediately. "Guess what?" I told him as I poured the food. "She says hi." He pushed his head into the food, unconcerned with human messages. I smiled. Spring deepened into something greener. The tuft of grass in the crack grew taller. Small weeds emerged along the fence, stubborn and bright. The building continued its slow, constant hum of life. People moved in. People moved out. Flyers appeared on the lobby board and were eventually taken down. Names changed on mailboxes. But every evening, the alley remained. Back door opens. Cat appears. Food poured. Quiet moment. Sometimes, when I was very tired or very full in the head, as Elena would have put it, I sat on the concrete ledge for a few extra minutes after he finished, watching the patterns of light reflecting on the building wall from passing cars. I thought about how strange and oddly comforting it was that if someone charted the history of this alley, they'd see overlapping presences, the dumpsters, the fence, the backs of building tenants carrying garbage bags, the cat, the old woman. Now, me. We all think the quiet parts of our lives go unnoticed, but every routine leaves a faint imprint somewhere. Once, a new neighbor, someone I'd only ever seen juggling grocery bags and a toddler, stepped into the alley while I was there. "Oh," she said, "I always see you feeding him from the kitchen window. My daughter calls you the cat person." I laughed, the sound echoing off the fence. "She used to be the cat person," I said, nodding toward where Elena once stood. "I'm just continuing the job." "Seems important," the neighbor said. "It is," I replied, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. The cat finished eating and started grooming himself, thoroughly unconcerned with our conversation. After a while, I got in the habit of stopping by the facility every few weeks. I never stayed long, half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat looking out the window. Occasionally I'd bring printed photos of the alley, a weird thing to think about, but it made sense at the time. A close-up of the tuft of grass, a shot of the fence, a blurry one where Mr. K was half turning away. She'd take them, hold them carefully like they were something precious, and smile. "You tell him I'm not gone," she said once, just watching from farther away. "I will," I said. I didn't know how long this would last. With older people, the future always feels like it's made of thinner glass. One day I knew the room would be empty. The cat would still be in the alley. The building would still stand. My life would still go on. But for now, we were all still connected by this strange, gentle thread. One summer evening, as the sky turned pink behind the buildings, I leaned against the wall and watched the cat eat. And I thought about the first time I'd seen Elena standing there. Purple coat, deliberate steps, small plastic container in hand. I thought about how, back then, I'd assumed the alley belonged to nobody. Now I knew better. It had never really belonged to anyone. It was too small for that, too overlooked. But it had been cared for. Not in the way of city maintenance or property management, but in the way of small, consistent kindnesses. A little food on the ground, a watchful eye, gentle words in a language the cat didn't understand, but felt anyway. At some point, without planning it, I'd stepped into that stream and let it carry me along too. I don't know how long I'll live in this building. Maybe I'll move next year. Maybe I'll stay for a decade. Life doesn't always give advance notice when it changes. But I know this. As long as I'm here, and as long as Mr. K keeps appearing in this alley, I will keep coming down the stairs with a container of food in my hand. Not because I think I'm saving him, not because I think he owes me anything, but because one quiet older woman in a purple coat taught me, without ever saying it directly, that sometimes the best way to keep yourself from disappearing is to show up where you're needed and do something small over and over. Feed the cat. Watch the world. Be part of the alley, even when no one is looking. And if someday you walk past a narrow space between buildings and see someone standing there with a plastic container while a cat eats at their feet, you'll know you're catching someone in the middle of a story that started with somebody else a long time ago. Maybe they knew her name. Maybe they didn't. But I do. Her name was Elena, and she taught me that even places that seem like they belong to nobody can become a little more human when someone decides quietly to care.